Hello everybody, welcome back to another stream as always. Joji Poji, Dave, Discerning Tarnished, Galaxy Dragon, nice to have all of you again. So on last night's stream, we watched, what was the first one? Kite Tales, What's Up with the Braids, Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree Lore. And that actually had some surprising connections that I wasn't expecting with the braids to the Zamorians, Marika, Godfrey, some of the Horn Scent, so that was a treat. And then following that, we watched Marika's strange new connections to the Glow-Eyed Queen, the Elden Ring Shadow, the Erdtree Lore Theory and Speculation by Zaif the Scholar, more or less talking about the ties of the skinning rites of Dominula to those of the Jar Scent, as I call them, and the Horn Scent potentates in Shadow of the Erdtree. After that, we watched Melina, Marika's Failed Successor by Dekazek, and that pretty much speaks for itself. Then we did not watch the real face of Lord Rykard, so I forgot about that. All right, anyway, let me get rid of these before I forget about them entirely. Wait, did I even watch that? No, maybe not. Okay. That's what I get for having too many things in here right now. Oh, and then we finished up with why did the Lords of Cinder abandon their thrones? That's right, because this one was shorter. That's what it was with the Firelink conspiracy. And for some reason, they don't think that Lothric linked, which I strongly disagree with, but it's whatever. Okay. So tonight, we have another video by Kite Tales called This Clue About Marika Might Solve the Timeline. And I do tend to be pretty skeptical about things saying that they've solved the timeline. So to follow up that video, I figured we could watch I Solved Shadow of the Erdtree, Elden Ring Theory by Hell Yeah Gaming, who requested I watch this himself. And then following that up, we could watch another one by Zaif the Scholar with Godwin's New Lore is Weirder Than You Think. So I'm assuming it's about the Death Knights and stuff, and the so-called cadaver surrogates, but we'll have to wait and see. Then after that, I'm assuming we'll still have a little bit of time left, and we can watch Lore of the Gates of Divinity by Eric. So, alright, that is what's on the agenda for tonight. So, Abyss, Phantom Leaves, Little Church Lore, welcome on in. Okay, so let's go ahead and watch that first video with This Clue About Marika Might Solve the Timeline by Kite Tales. Oh, you're not late. I just pretty much started right now. Right on time, actually. And welcome back in, Art Crusader.
Is going to blow your mind.
Right.
I'm going to show you something about Marika that I think is going to blow your mind. And I think this is irrefutable evidence in creating the timeline. And I think it might actually disrupt a lot of our pre-existing ideas about when things may have happened. Before I do that, let me give you a little tiny refresher by showing you the statues of Marika from the Lands Between. We know these very well. She has two braids, one of which is much longer than the other, and now we know the reason why, and that's because she gave it as an offering to the grandmother at Shaman Village. She has two armbands. She's in this hanging sacrificial pose. We're very familiar with this image. Now, the statues of Marika in the Realm of Shadow are somewhat stylized the same, arms still outstretched, but palms are facing upward this time. She has a braided belt. She's not wearing this belt in the statues in the Lands Between. And she has two braids, and these braids seem to be about the same length. And if we can...
I kind of think that this one is still cut off a bit, like it's not nearly as full. But the other thing that I wanted to mention, and Kite Tales hit upon it briefly, is the sacrificial pose. Because of the way that Marika is kind of leaning forward, it is pretty analogous to many ways that Jesus is depicted having been crucified. So I definitely think we get a lot of that imagery suggested to us even early on. And so we just kind of get that payoff towards the end of the game, and we actually kind of see her literally crucified onto a gigantic rune arc looking like thing.
Assume that these statues of Marika were constructed and sculpted following her appearance at the time of when they were erected. That now gives us a good idea about what may have been going on at the time of whatever construction these statues are located in.
And so, thinking about the whole crucifixion angle, it's a little bit weird because then were these made after the shattering, after she was like crucified? Or like, what is the story behind this thing itself, I guess? And Young Tongue, welcome on in. Oh, you're Queen Marika lover, or Markia lover. Thank you so much for the 5. I appreciate that. And nice to see you again.
So this is Marika much later in her life, and this is Marika earlier. She doesn't have the armbands, her outfit is different, her hair is shorter. Now there's one more statue of Marika that we see, and that is the statue of Marika in Mesmer's Dark Chamber. And as I was playing around with Reshader and the mods and trying to find out how to increase the brightness, I actually toggled a mod that lets you see like the rough polygons of the structure.
I probably need to figure out what kind of mod this is. This seems like it could be kind of nice, especially for looking at maybe armor pieces. Maybe not.
And I was actually shocked to see that this braid is much longer than the standard length of the statue of Marika in the Realm of Shadow. So now we have 3 different versions of Marika. We have 3 different hair lengths, and this statue having one armband only on one arm but not the other. This now is another signifier of the in-between time. And now we can link this time period to Mesmer. Now, I'm not sure the significance of the armband. I'm wondering if it's some sort of marital status, that it signifies she's married, or it signifies maybe an important win in her campaign, an important milestone, and now she has 2 in the lands between. But the fact that Marika is missing half a braid when she is holding baby Mesmer makes me wonder if this now corresponds to what happened there, either before his...
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me that she'd be missing the braid, because like, well... Yeah, I mean, I can kind of see where Keitel is coming from, because if she's going to tie the braid thing to like the creation of the Erdtree, because Marika leaves that minor Erdtree incantation there, then it could intentionally imply... It could potentially imply that Mesmer was born after the Erdtree was born, which is something that I am amenable to. And Nectarine, nice to see you again. Marika was conveniently crucified in the shape of a rune, or maybe somebody had a sense of humor. Well, for what it's worth, we also do have the depictions of the little dudes crucified throughout the lands between on her rune. So it seemed like that might have been more of a practice in the past. It's almost a little bit surprising we didn't get a repeat of that in the DLC, and that the impaled folks were impaled just on spears and not like the rune arc looking thing.
His birth, or corresponding with, she made the sacrifice to the grandmother. And by the way, this serene, beautiful look of her holding this baby, we don't see some warlord, bloodthirsty queen. We see a mother holding a baby. But considering her braid is missing, this makes me think that Mesmer may have even been conceived out of the revelation of what happened at Shaman Village. This, to me, puts it around the same time period. And if we are going off the length of the braids as time having passed, this now means to me that Marika's conquest in the outer lands between, that may have possibly happened much later than what we're seeing here. If we can assume that at the time these statues were constructed, that they would reflect the way that Marika currently looked, then we could assume, okay, at this time, Marika's hair was much longer, much time has passed. This now, to me, shakes up the timeline in a way that I'm not sure I can reconcile.
So, this is part of the weird thing of like talking about the imagery and symbolism of games specifically, because how convenient is it that one character only ever has like one outfit at a time, and that's how you'll only ever see them? And I say that a bit sarcastically, but like in real life, it wouldn't be that big of a surprise if a woman had long hair, then short hair, then long hair. Obviously, there would be a length a length of time to kind of correspond with that, but it would really only be a period of maybe a couple years. So I'm assuming like this length of hair would probably be 3 to 4 years of not cutting one's hair to get to that length. And I think in the other depictions of Marika, it's not like, it's maybe like about a 2 years worth of a difference, I think, generally speaking. Actually, no, this is probably closer to 5 years length. I don't know. It depends. Yeah, I'll go with like 5. Not that it matters too much. And then Aaron, welcome on into the stream. He said Radagon's pose is also crucifix-like, even though it's different in T-posey. It is definitely a lot more similar to like the cross than like the crucified pose, I think, but definitely T-pose for sure. And then Discerning Tarnished has a video that will premiere at 9:15 a.m. tomorrow. It examines the symbolism of Marika's hair. Okay, please review it tomorrow. You want me to review it tomorrow? So I try to let people's videos sit so that way, I mean, not that my channel is very big at all, don't get me wrong, so that way I don't like siphon views too much. So like, if you want me to review it tomorrow, I will, but I would rather, for your channel's sake, like maybe wait a couple days. If that's fine with you. Oh, effigies of martyrs. Thank you, Little Church Lore. So the little dudes on the summoning pool statues are effigy martyrs. Thank you. And then Aaron said the hair length definitely feels intentional from a storytelling perspective. Yeah, sorry, I didn't finish that thought. So this kind of like goes back into like one of those things where was this just a bit of an oversight? Was it intentional? And it doesn't help that because it's a game, it's hard to tell if there's a like how much continuity there is in the timeline between the depictions of these characters, because quite often a lot of games just make shorthand with like a linear progression and characters just kind of always look like themselves or just like a little bit further along, rather than having like what's the word? Like, all I'm thinking of is like branching changes, zigzagging changes. That doesn't make sense in English. Hopefully you guys get what I mean. Like, there isn't a lot of flip-flopping with appearances. Like, a character won't typically have like really short hair and then like really long hair and then really short hair again, unless it's like part of a gag. But that's all I can really think of. And then Operator, nice to see you again. Okay, good to go, Tarnished. Radagon being the crucifix and Marika being crucified is an interesting visual metaphor for their dynamic. I like that, yeah. That's where putting the points in faith come in from? Yeah, okay. All right, so let's dive back in.
I'm still thinking through that, but there's one other thing on this statue that I think is a huge clue about her background, and that is the braided belt. So the braided belt we don't see in the Lands Between. It's gone. It's cast off. And this brings me to my first point, which is...
I want to back up. I'm sure she's going to go back to the statues at some point. So I'm willing to hear this out, but I am skeptical about a lot of people's ideas about like the belt and the garments she wears, partially because I think they're a little bit inconsistent and used at the developer's leisure, I guess. I'm trying to think of the proper way to phrase that, but I'm failing. So for instance, when we see Marika do whatever she does to pull the thing out of the womb-like, eye-looking like thing, whatever you want to call it, in the story trailer, she does have her kind of winding snake-like bracelets on, but here she does not. So it's just a little bit inconsistent is all I'm saying.
Is a huge clue about...
Yes, Radagon does wear the belt too.
And that is the braided belt. So the braided belt we don't see in the Lands Between. It's gone. It's cast off. And this brings me to my first point, which is the braids. Now, I just did a video about braids And you all were so insightful in the comment section, adding your ideas and opinions about why braids were so important to the horn scent. And it really helped tie everything together. That the horn scent viewed the braid as a symbol of divinity or worship. It was a sacred symbol. The spiral, the helix, it's all over horn scent culture. It's in their incantations, it's in their structures, their towers, their pillars, their curtains, their paraphernalia. The tablets showing a spiral tree. It's in their incense.
I guess I hadn't noticed that even the little urns spiral. Like these ones, I did not pick that up.
The tablets showing a spiral tree. It's in their incense burners. The spiral was a sacred symbol to them. The braid was a symbol of divinity. It was important to them. Marika having a braided belt, Marika having braids in her hair, shows me that she must have had ties to the horn scent in a way. Now we know Marika isn't horn scent. We know that she's from Shaman Village.
So I don't necessarily know if just being from the Shaman Village means that she isn't horn scent, but this could go down to a difference of like terminology as to whether or not horn scent is used prescriptively or descriptively. So what I mean by that is if horn scent is used prescriptively, that in my mind, and I might be like mixing up my terminology here, it would mean that the horn scent themselves are a specific type of tribe, race, folk, whatever you want to call them. Whereas if it's used descriptively, it would be used to describe them purely because they have the horns. And so to back that up a little bit, we do have what I would refer to as quote-unquote hornless horn scent with the little black shades that we can find around Belurot. Like most specifically the ones with the Misbegotten Cleaver stand out quite a bit for lacking the horns. Then there's also potentially like the bandaged guys that are by all of the fly scent, as I tend to call them, just for ease of terminology, but right. Yeah, you're kind of inundated with spirals when you're in there. Scout Lisi, nice to see you. Braids are also found across a bunch of cultures. It doesn't mean they have the same cultural meaning. True story, but at least within the context of the game, I'm very willing to entertain this because it turned out to have a bit more substance to it than I thought there was on the surface. Everybody is now looking at Uzumaki, aren't they, Phantom Leaves? I think I was talking to Kite Tails and she told me she was having like an Uzumaki moment looking into all this stuff, now that you mention it. All right, here we go.
So what could this possibly mean? Why does Marika have the divine braid? Why is she wearing a braided cord around her waist? I think that Marika was the jar saint that they were trying to create. The horn scent being obsessed with the spiral and the braid and the way that the crucible blended life together in a haphazard way in this primordial soup where everything expressed characteristics of things that it shouldn't. Turtles having horns, creatures having feathers where there ought to be fur or skin. The horn scent were trying to blend life together and play God. They were playing with the cycle of life and death.
I would need to look back at the drakes because I don't recall if they have horns in this game. Because I know like the Banished Knights have the kind of horn scent type horns on their armor, but I just thought of that as a kind of relic from the way the Ringed City Knights have like Drake-like horns on their armor in Dark Souls 3. But anyway, setting that aside, Operator brought up a good comment in that Belurot is a caste society, as you think Night Scout pointed out a while ago, and it's probably related to how many large and spirally their horns are, and that no horns were people without horns were probably marginalized. I think that's likely as well. And if they weren't marginalized, I mean, well, I guess it just depends on like how forcefully you're talking about marginalization. So yeah, you might be right there. But going back to Kite Tail's point, I would disagree that the horn scent are making saints, and part of that is just like a couple differences in the localization, where Saint kind of comes across a lot stronger in English as to its connotations, but the Hornsent ghost in Bonnie Village is saying, like, when you get into the jar, you're not going to become a saint. He's just saying, like, be a good girl, go into the jar, essentially, to, like, be a good person. Like, you'll be a good girl, go in the jar. So he isn't promising whoever he's jarring a renewed life of saintlyhood as much as it is just, like, being good and potentially free or absolved from sin, which I don't remember exactly how much I've talked about the absolution of sin, at least on stream, but I brought it up very circumspectly in the Discord a couple times, but not too much, in that with all of this talk about, like, cardinal sin and sinning and Mikola wanting to absolve himself of his sins, I have wondered how exactly that ties back into Radagon taking the Celestial Dew and marrying Renala. Because would that have washed away Marika's sins, or is it Radagon's sins? And the overall ambiguity of the timeline of when the Shadowlands got sealed might tie into that. It might not, because I don't know. Well, if... Alright, let me try to parse out my thought. If Renala gifted R'hllana her braid, I'm assuming it would be after she married Radagon, which means that might have happened after he'd already taken absolution. So I would almost assume that would have happened pre-sealing, and I don't think the Celestial Dew absolution absolved him of the sin of, like, sealing the Land of Shadow or anything like that, if that makes sense to you guys. And then True Connoisseur and Sayfrog, welcome back into the stream. Discerning Tarnished also disagrees about trying to create Marika. Still leaves the overall point of the jars a mystery. So the jars are kind of told to us that it's the cycle of life and rebirth put into human hands. I don't remember the English exactly, but it's essentially samsara or rinne. And for whatever reason, that seemed important to the Hornsent, and I think it has to do with purity, death, and curses, and potentially them wanting to reach the divine, and being cursed being, like, the opposite of transcending their flesh. Oh yeah, and then Scalise said, jarring seems to be some combo of punishment, absolution, and purification. So yeah, going back to my crackpot theory, pun intended here, and this isn't, like, a real theory, this is me just, like, spitballing an idea that came to me in a dream, in that if the Miko being jarred with sinners absolves the sinners of their crime, could that imply that there's something specific about the Miko that might be related to the way that Celestial Dew can absolve crimes, sins? Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it's just a coincidence and are a different process entirely, but just leaving that out there for some food for thought. All right, let's go back to the video.
They were mere mortals trying to create their god. And this is a flip on the trope of a god creating men. They were men creating a god. And I think Marika was their god. In Ballarat Tower Jail, there is a altar for a great jar. And on the podium of that altar is a lemniscate symbol, the infinity symbol. Within this symbol, you see a man, a human, you see a bird. You also see what appear to be two beasts, maybe foxes or cats. You see all of these creatures within the confines of this infinity symbol, which is in itself made out of what appears to be a branch.
And I was wondering if this symbol is kind of what appears on the hem of Mikola's robes.
It's woven. You see even the spiral braided pattern right there again. And I think this is essentially what the jars were. It was a combination of man, bird, beast, giant hippo salamander. I think that the Hornsent probably had a perverted sense of the idea of if I fits, I sits. They probably thought if they could chop it up, they could put it in a jar. And I think they experimented and experimented and experimented until the sewers ran red with the blood of their victims. And then they found...
And yeah, I would definitely agree with that, just based off of the maybe lore relevant, maybe lore irrelevant aspect of us finding so many damn pot recipes in the Land of Shadow.
The shaman made wonderful additions to their recipe because the shaman made everything in the jar blend together well. He made it stick. And that was Marika's people. They were the final missing ingredient. They were that close to figuring out, okay, how do we create the ideal life? And then they found their missing component, and that was an Empyrean. They needed an Empyrean shaman to blend it all together and make it one successful product. And I think that's why Marika was the only successful saint that arose from this jar practice. And now this brings me to the Hornsent Grandam that we see in Bellarat Tower Settlement. She has dialogue that is somewhat locked. Well, it's not locked, but it's hidden. You might not necessarily know to do it. After you beat the divine beast, if you wear its head and you go speak to her, she then has dialogue about Mesmer and his lineage and the wanton strumpet. And her name changes. She's now called the Empyrean Grandam. And Grandam is an archaic term for grandmother or old woman, female ancestor. And the fact that she's called...
Wait, does that change on the map, and or did that get patched out? I know that the item description did. I would need to look at that. That's kind of interesting.
Empyrean Grandam, we can now maybe see this in a different number of ways. She was...
Oh yeah, and I forgot to talk about it on my diatribe earlier about like whether or not the Hornsent is a prescriptive term or a descriptive one. The fact that the Hornsent / Empyrean Grandam is essentially a finger reader crone, except with horns, leads me to believe that there might not be as much of a functional difference between the Hornsent and non-Hornsent tribes, I guess. So that got patched. Interesting.
As a grandmother to an Empyrean, she was an elderly Empyrean herself. She was an ancestor to an Empyrean, or she was maybe the grandmother type figure for an Empyrean. And the only Empyrean that we know confirmed to be in this area is Marika. The only Empyrean that she references is Marika. That strumpet.
Oh yeah, and then I don't remember if I like brought up the question in my video on the subject, but then does that imply that the finger reader crones themselves are Empyreans? And obviously this has been retconned to a degree, but even if they were not Empyreans, they might still be Newman or the folk of Marika, essentially.
By the way, her calling Marika a wanton strumpet. So, wanton is already sort of, I guess, maybe used in a derogatory way for this like loose woman. So is strumpet. So her doubling down in that way, calling Marika a wanton strumpet, is like calling her a slutty slut. This is such a charged and
I wasn't expecting that
insult. And there's something there. She's not calling her, she's calling her what she thinks Marika has done. So this Empyrean Grandam, I believe, may have been the figure that raised Marika once she was taken out of the jar, once she had finalized, once they figured out, okay, she's the one. It worked this time. And that's why she's the Empyrean Grandam, because Empyrean isn't a term that is thrown around loosely. We can count the Empyreans that we know for certain on one hand. Marika, the Glomide Queen, Mikola, Melania, and Rani. Empyreans are rare. And then...
Hey guys, that's 4 Empyreans. Or no, maybe that was 5. Yeah, no, that's 5. I was gonna be like, hey look, 4 Empyreans, that means 4 fingers of Metter. But no, in all seriousness, Aaron brought up the point that they've heard that it also... That hold on, I'll just read the actual thing. You do think that you do think it's likely that Grandma has ties to the Empyrean still, but isn't like literally an Empyrean as it's implied. You also read it used to imply it's even in Japanese, and the Japanese was patched too. Sorry, my inflection was awful about that, but anyway, I'm just gonna move on. The way that I read the Japanese was more like she was the grandmother to the Empyrean rather than she herself was an Empyrean, although there was a bit of ambiguity about that. And then True Connoisseur assumed it meant she was the grandam of the Empyrean Tower Ritual, a ceremonial role. Potentially, yes. All right.
On top of that, you have Marika being a shaman. That would have been such a rarity. And I think that it's possible that they may have even known this. They may have even noticed there was something different about this little shaman girl. Because we find out through Ansbach that Empyrean eyes are different. When Mikola divests his eye, when he leaves it behind, Ansbach has some dialogue about that. He says, "Tender Mikola's eye is no mere morsel of flesh. It is a vessel of soaring grace." Proof of his Empyrean lineage. We know that there's something peculiar about Empyrean eyes, to the point where Ansbach said it's not just an eye. There's something unique in the Empyrean eye that stood out. And I think that the Empyrean eye might have actually been a portal for the fingers to look through. During the meteor Mother of Fingers fight, you see a tiny, tiny little red dot. You see what I think to be a singular eye. And I think that eye may have been the method by which they looked through the Empyrean eye. This was a connection. This was like the spy cam that the fingers would use to look through the Empyrean eye. And that's why it's different. It's no mere morsel of flesh. It's proof of their Empyrean lineage, proof that they've been selected by the fingers. I think that Marika stood out because of her eye. She was selected.
And then, of course, that raises the question whether or not Ronnie got rid of her eye, was the one that she got rid of her left eye, or is her left eye like her spirit side? So like the spirit part that inhabits the doll is like her left eye, the one that like she kind of has open. So anyway, lots of fun talking about that. And I am really sad that I managed to screw up the Ansbach quest dialogue there in the lore through, because it's just probably one of the biggest like lore dumps in the game.
And the Grandam Empyrean was the one chosen to raise her in the Hornsent culture. And we know that Hornsent didn't value traits like empathy and hesitation. They didn't value kindness. They didn't value things that they viewed to be weaknesses in the way of what they felt needed to be done. Oh, we don't have time.
I don't know if that's true, but I like that idea regardless, because a lot of that sounds reminiscent of the way that Godfrey waged his wars and battles, or at least the way that we're told he did. But in general, I do think there are examples of kindness and love within the Hornsent culture, if for no other reason than the gourmet scorpion stew's descriptions talking about being made with the secret ingredients and whatnot. Oh yeah, and then Little Church Lore brings up the great point about the bouquet from Bellyrat, suggesting otherwise. True story. Operator's disappointed both of Millennia's eyes are rotted. You guess that's a way of keeping us guessing. And yeah. It's interesting, because I was going to say maybe that shows that she was destined to have never been like an actual Empyrean godhood candidate, because she wouldn't get that far. But Gowry makes it sound like that doesn't really matter, I suppose. I'm resisting making a see true horror joke, but anyway.
To hesitate about killing people, we just have to do it. To hesitate, to second guess, that's a wickedness. And I think Marika was
it's defeat.
Raised in the Hornsent culture to adopt these values. And that is why we see Marika with her braids the divine spiral, the divine braid. We see her with a braided belt, and that links her back to the horn scent. I also think that the horn scent may have chopped up a snake and they also put it in jars, because if you go to Bonnie Village, there is a snake skin there. Now, it doesn't look chopped up, but it looks shedded. And I'm wondering...
Yeah, I was going to say pretty much that exactly, that this seems more like a molting than it being butchered, although maybe she could suggest that they waited for it to molt to then butcher, so that way its scales would be soft. I can see that. And then Impact Player, nice to see you again.
Wondering if this snake skin is here to signify the snake got put into a jar, possibly the same jar with Marika. Maybe Marika shared a jar with a lump of this snake. This snake skin actually looks exactly like the one in the Temple of Egle, and so I'm not sure if it's supposed to be the same snake, but I think it's very possible that Marika definitely had aspects of the serpent inside her, and that's when we see Mesmer being born, the snake that writhed within Mesmer.
And one could even go as far as saying, like, maybe that's how she was given Radagon, but I'm not a big fan of that theory, but I think it's, you know, at least worth consideration, even if I dismiss it pretty summarily. But yeah, that could potentially tie into, like, why Radagon would despise his red locks. But then, of course, that would also bring up a lot of questions about, like, why the fire giant connection at all? Is that just a red herring, or is there something more to it? But yeah, the whole aspect of Marika's children just being so wholly different from each other is vexing, to say the least. And I know we often joke about, like, how Mikola and Millennia are born and whether or not they're clones or if they were, like, parthenogenicized. Anyway, but that might be like an actual explanation as to how Marika's children are born. Maybe it's something more like the old Greek god sense, where, like, procreation wasn't strictly necessary to produce children, or maybe I should say copulation rather than procreation. Anyway, I think you guys get what I mean by all that. Operator asks, do I think Radagon was part of Marika pre or post godhood? I am on the fence. I will eternally sit on the fence until I get enough reason to believe one thing over the other. And then Discerning Tarnish thinks that the serpent is a rival deity or god. And that reminds me that I was going to bring up the whole aspect of that one random serpent god mentioned that may or may not be related to Rykard's snake. So where the hell does that one fit in to the rival Hornsent culture, the Marika culture, that random cast off snakeskin in Bonnie Village? I think it's supposed to be reminiscent of Mesmer and then his connection to Marika, because we do get the oh mother gesture from that Bonnie statuette / corpse thing. And so I do tend to think that those corpses are meant to signify something about Marika's character. Especially because the second one in Bonnie Village is beheaded, just like all of these statues in the Shadow Realm of Marika, sans Mesmer's Dark Chamber. Yeah, Scaleezy said Athena busted out of Zeus's head. I don't know if that's better or worse for Marika and her situation with the Omen twins, but you get what I'm putting down. Aaron's a subscriber to the Jarika theory. Not based around sainthood. You just think she didn't come out of that unscathed and was jarred. Yeah, I think that's a possibility. Don't get me wrong. And then Scaleezy brings up the good point that soft shell crabs are literally just crabs that just molted, so they're all soft. So waiting for the snake to shed is definitely possible, especially because like there's aspects to snakes, or not snakes, but scales being like literal armor in mythologies and like the ancient world and stuff. Just like how we can use like hides like leather to be like leather armor. You could have like dragon scale armor, so maybe they needed the snake to shed its skin so that way they could actually pierce its tough scales, perhaps. But y'all know, a serpent never dies.
And so now if we go back to that statue of her holding baby Mesmer, he doesn't look like a snake. He just looks like a baby. But I think that Marika, when she cut off this braid of her hair, this may have been around the same time that she figured out or she learned what happened to her people. And I think she may have wanted to start getting rid of these aspects that were inside of her, that were a part of her without her consent. And she took that snake aspect and she put it into baby Mesmer. And then she plucked out his eye and sealed it so it couldn't come out. And I think that's a very real possibility of what happened here. I think Marika probably desperately loved him, but she couldn't have this aspect inside of her, and this living thing that she had to shed. She put in a baby and she hid it. She loved him, but no one can know about you. No one can know what I am. I'm not sure if that may be accurate, but I think it's a really good explanation as to why Marika, at this point now, we see her one armband, one braid is longer, one braid is missing, and she's holding baby Mesmer. I think that all really blends that together very well. We also learned that Melania was Mesmer's younger sister, and Marika could have done the same to her. She sealed an aspect of herself that she didn't like in Melania. And that is how she got rid of things, is by pushing them into another being, a vessel to hold this living thing that was a part of her, that was blended with her in the jar when she was created as a saint.
So speaking on that point, what do you guys think about the idea that the beast eye being purple could represent like destined death? Because I guess it does, kind of vibrate when you're death root. But anyway, and Marika potentially putting in a gloomy eye into Malekith to keep destined death sealed. Hey guys, are the runes stored in the eyeballs? Maybe, unironically, yeah. Because there is all that stuff about grace being in the eye, so I guess like runes could fit too. Will we also see the weird like runes of occultation? Impact says, is Mesmer missing both eyes? Why only give him one false eye? So he might always keep his natural left eye closed. But as far as I recall, even the gigantic snake form of him is either missing that eye or it's closed. But he does have a bunch of tinier eyes. But anyway, I wondered whether or not that kindling of Mesmer is supposed to have been his like natural born eye. Let's see if we can see that.
Them into.
I think it was right before this.
Marika could have done the same.
Yeah, so I've wondered whether or not this is supposed to be his real eye, because he breaks the sword seal looking like thing, and this doesn't quite match up to the depiction of Marika's rune, and it looks more snake-like because of the slitted pupil. But I don't know. Runes are also sort of light. Light goes into the eyes, 5-head. Yeah. And then Discerning Tarnish thinks that the eyes are just metaphorical expressions of souls and bodies. So I'm kind of really tempted to like bring up the Schopenhauer stuff and talk about like wills as it relates to eyes and observing the universe and whatnot. But let me try to think about how I want to approach this, if I even really want to do it, because it'll just be a really long tangent, perhaps. Yeah, I think I'll probably just be better off refraining for now, but I will make a couple points, and hopefully you guys can like tie things together, or if you don't, I'm sorry, but if runes look like eyes, which kind of resemble the void of the greater will, then how intentional is it that those who look into like the primeval current also seem to have an eye-like appendage appear like on them? So the third eye of Estelle, for instance, or things like that. So in order to understand the world and yourself, first you need the will to know that you are yourself and to exist. You need the will to exist. And then once you know you exist, you can define what you are by figuring out what you are not, which means like observing the outer world. So that might tie into the whole like rune, eye, greater will, cosmic type stuff going on in Elden Ring. But it's kind of really abstract to talk about without like a bunch of time to really corral those thoughts into a proper order, and they would definitely be better served with a lot of imagery to accompany it. And then Pixie does think that the kindling is the eye. Does that mean the Empyreans all have the power to burn the old order to start their new one? But you also don't really think Melina and Mesmer are Empyreans, so you don't know. I don't think so, because we don't see either Mikola or Melania really having any powers of fire, and Ranni needed to steal a fragment of the Rune of Death to destroy her own body, which also seems unrelated to fire. Interesting question, though.
To her, she sealed an aspect of herself that she didn't like in Melania, and that is how she got rid of things, is by pushing them into another being, a vessel to hold this living thing that was a part of her, that was blended with her in the jar when she was created as a saint. Now,
so that's a neat idea, but I don't really want to buy into it, if for no other reason than we know the Scarlet Rot is more directly connected to an outer god, whereas we don't necessarily have that same kind of thing going on with Mikola or Ranni, more specifically as Empyrean children, or even the other demigod children, kind of, sort of, perhaps with the exception of Moog, although he ran into the formless mother later. But yeah, I do like that idea that Marika is divesting parts of herself, because it's tantalizing, but it also brings up so many questions that I don't think can be properly answered, and just ends up complicating what little that we do know about it. Like, where is the snake connection? Where is the rot connection? Especially since the rot was worshipped in ancient times. So, yeah, I digress. Do I think Mikola and Melania had shadows? If not, why? That's a great question. Next question. No, so, we don't see any of their shadows. I've wondered whether or not Melania kind of served as Mikola's shadow in some regards, but maybe it's because their two fingers died and they lost their shadows. But then that also raises the question, like, why the hell is only Ranni's two fingers alive at the events of the timeline of the events of the current game, you know? The current time, rather. And that doesn't make sense. Like, hey, Ranni, you ding-dong, if you just waited, you would have won. But, I mean, not really, because the other two fingers might not have died if the ring wasn't shattered. But it does bring up the question, like, why are hers alive until she kills them?
Now, the dark chamber in which you find Mesmer is attached to the storeroom, and this is a museum. It's a library of vast proportions, several stories tall, of records and tablets and histories and tales. You even see in Marika's bedroom chamber tablets and tablets, histories. I think that Marika was very curious about the history of the Lands Between. I think she was very curious about where she may have came from. And I think that Marika may have learned about what happened to her in the storeroom by going through all of these records. It's attached to this area where Mesmer lived. It's attached to this area where she hid Mesmer. And I wonder if she found out about what happened to her, and Mesmer was a product of that revelation, of that anger and hatred she felt, that it was manifested in this way, and she wanted to get rid of it. And so she put it into Mesmer, and that's why he isn't able to escape that hatred, is because it's the very concept that was put into him. And Mesmer's chamber being attached to the storeroom kind of made me think that this is where all of this may have gone down. This is where Marika may have found out the truth about her life. I think that Marika may have actually had a Sephiroth
Hell yeah.
moment in the storeroom. And if you've played Final Fantasy VII, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, Sephiroth is the main antagonist of this game. He is a perfect creation. Long, flowing, beautiful hair. He is the ideal specimen that was created from an ancient race of beings that no longer exist. And the DNA from one surviving being was taken. Her name was Genova. And Genova has been kept alive in this state against her will. And her DNA has been used.
I was muted. Oh no. I was laughing really hard and just saying that the auto captions calling her Guva was destroying me.
A class of super soldiers by a military corporation named Shinra. But Sephiroth doesn't know this. Sephiroth is just an upstanding, respectable tool of Shinra. He's their ideal soldier. He's their poster boy. And he's very proud to be so. But one night when he's stationed away in another town, he has access to the company records. And he starts delving into them, and he finds out the truth about how he came to be. He found out about Genova and about where he came from, about all of the awful experiments that Shinra was conducting, all of these mutations, the torture of people and creatures that they were doing for years, trying to create their ideal specimen. And he locks himself away for days, reading everything, absorbing it all, learning the history that's been concealed from him from his whole life. And then he snaps. He becomes enraged at learning about the truth of how he was created and what was done to the ancients and what was done to his mother Genova. And he burns the entire town down. And then from that point out, he sets out to bring revenge against the entire planet for what was done to his people. Is this sounding familiar to you? Genova actually kind of looks like Marika at the end of the game as well, the disembodied torso that's just being suspended. But this whole storyline of Sephiroth reading all these records and entries and then just burning it all down, that's what I'm envisioning might have happened to Marika, I think.
So I'm going to leave the kind of discrepancies of Final Fantasy VII lores alone. No, I'm not. So in a way, Kite Tales is right, because that is kind of the story that Sephiroth figures out at that point in the game, although there's more to the origins of Genova, in that she wasn't actually an ancient as much as she was the calamity from the skies that crash landed into the planet and was seeking to just like drain it of its life and vitality, its life stream and stuff. So she's a super antagonistic, evil being, essentially, to the ancient people. And they eventually sealed her away, and the people of Shinra, in their search for the life stream energy sources, discovered Genova, thought she was the ancients, like sole remaining survivor type thing, and they took her and they unknowingly tried cloning her, and that's where they came up with the super soldiers like Sephiroth. And it's just like a cycle of ignorance, which led to the greatest tragedy of that game. So setting all that stuff aside, I don't know whether or not the storeroom would have predated Marika's reign, and because we do see Mesmer's sigil all over the place, I am skeptical about it. So it could have undergone some renovations, to be sure, And there's all that other iconography to consider with a tower, like potentially collecting the sap of the Shadow Tree and whatnot. But setting that stuff aside, certainly the documents within the Shadow Keep predate it, and Marika and Mesmer's forces collated them, and she probably would have gone through it regardless, because we can see that she was certainly a scholar, if not of the Golden Order, then of like the more ancient Rao stuff, depending on how directly you want to connect the ancient stone tablets within her bedchambers to the ancient stone tablets of the specimen storeroom. So coming up with the whole Sephiroth parallel is really interesting to me. I'm not sure how well it fully pans out in regards to like learning about her origin, although that could potentially explain the so-called betrayal of the Hornsent by Marika if we thought that they were on the same team at one point. So I could definitely see a lot of points in favor of that kind of interpretation. So I like it, but I'm not fully on board. And sorry, operator, about your timeline being crumpled up now. All right. And then MK, nice to see you again.
I think she learned about how she came to be much later on after her existence, after she had already been working for the Hornsent, after she had completed assignments for them and whatnot. At the bottom of the storehouse is a hospital wing for the jars, and this basement is littered with them. Perfume bottles hang all over, and lifeless jar innards lay in beds. Marika was no doubt trying to save her people through these hopeless operations. And this is such a heartbreaking and incredibly tragic scene. The desperation in trying to piece together the shaman, but as you can see, it was an impossible feat. And so this wing has been left abandoned. But we see the actions of a woman who has been heartbroken and hurt. We see her empathy, her pain, her love. And I think that when she saw that this wasn't going to work, that might have been when she became determined to then exterminate the Hornsent. If she couldn't bring her people back, then she would wipe out those that took them away. And this...
Speaking of soft-shell crab, this kind of reminds me of hermit crabs now that I think about it. But yeah, I do really like this infirmary type place within the Shadow Keep, because it's so evocative with like the perfuming stuff, and it's just not what I would have expected at the bottom of this kind of a fort, essentially.
This is why I think that Mesmer being conceived shortly after Marika makes this discovery and cuts off her braid, I think it fits together so well, because he was meant to be a symbol of fear. That was his appointment by his mother. But she plotted, she bided her time, she may have not even been strong enough, she may have not even had the allies to do so at this point. But I think this was when that plan may have went into effect. And that is the betrayal that the Empyrean Hornsent Grandam is talking about. Marika. How could their perfect creation, how could their saint, their perfect spiral, braided together from so many strands of life, who defeated their enemies, who fought for them, how could she do this to them?
So I'd like to know whom Kitetails believed was the enemy of the Hornsent, whether or not it's the thing at the top of the Divine Tower or the Fire Giant specifically. Although this isn't entirely relevant to the ideas she's presenting here, I'm just kind of curious.
The potentate Hornsent that we meet also mentions the betrayal of his people by Marika. But for there to be betrayal, there has to have first been trust, or a promise or a vow. Something had to have been broken there. I think
Which brings about consequences ever more dire. Oh, damn it. Oh. Am I going to have to rethink Muriel's dialogue about Radagon screwing things up. Does that tie into this rather than the Renala thing? I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it right now. It hurts. I will need to mull on that because a lot of me is just kind of rejecting it because it seems so self-evident that it should pertain to Renala. But there's a part of it which never really sat well with me in that Muriel has that very ominous line about consequences ever more dire or whatever it was, but in my estimation, we never really got what those consequences were other than potentially Marika being crucified by the Elden Beast. But honestly, that seemingly had very little to do with the Renala situation, that it does make me want to reconsider what Muriel says about Radagon in the light of the DLC and like the portrayal and whatnot. Why not both? I mean, it's possible. I've just like mentally hit a brick wall trying to like think about this point right now, though. Let's just all burn our timelines together. It's pandemonium. Let chaos take the world. All right.
Another scenario where betrayal might be an option is if Marika somehow betrayed another Empyrean that we don't directly see mentioned in the DLC, but the Gloam-Eyed Queen. It was speculated that this scene in the story trailer had something to do with her, and my brilliant friend Kate, we've done a couple of Lore Maiden streams together. She had a really amazing theory to share when the story trailer first dropped, and I still think that it's a really awesome idea. And she proposed that Radagon may have been used to seduce the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and then she was slain and her body was used for Marika's ascension through the Divine Gate. And the sky that we see here above the Divine Gate is Gloam. Gloam is a time of day. It's just after sunset, twilight. And so the Gloam-Eyed Queen, and we see the sunset sky, but present-day Ener Elim, twilight doesn't exist. It's as if night itself was killed. So Gloam doesn't exist here anymore, and I think that's really significant. Now, after I've pointed out these things,
and I've wondered whether or not that means we are on the inside of that portal in the story trailer, or if we're not. I don't know. Somebody had brought that up as a comment on one of my streams for videos, and although they didn't seem to believe it very much themselves, I was like, you might be onto something there, and I definitely think it's worth consideration. And then Pixie, thanks for the quote. Severing a vow, strongest of bonds, has consequences ever more dire. Yeah, we never know what those consequences for Radagon were, unless like it was the curses afflicted to Mikola and Melania. That would be some just desserts, wouldn't it? It's actually, well, I guess Ymir implies that it wouldn't be that, but I mean Ymir is kind of not wholly reliable, perhaps. Phantom believes is dying on the hill that's not what a twilight sky looks like, but whatever. Yeah, I do think it looks a bit more reminiscent of storms than actual gloam, but who knows with these kind of liberties taken for artistic expression. And then Elmo, welcome back into the stream. And I think Dave as well. I think I was confusing you for the other Dave, but everybody, welcome back in. And then Elmo said, maybe the vow is just another FromSoft take on causality. Could you elaborate what you mean about that in the context of Radagon severing his vow with Renala? The Storm-Eyed Queen? Yeah. Well, we got rid of the Storm Lord, so maybe she was the Storm-Eyed Queen. All right. Moving on from the Gloam discussion.
To you about Marika's statues, let's take a look at Radagon's statue because we see some of the same themes here. We see Radagon He has one long single braid. He also has a braided cord around his belt. And he also has 2 armbands. And I think the reason that I'm leaning towards this idea that the armbands mean or signify marriage is that both Marika and Radigan have 2 armbands. And at this point in time, they would have each been married twice. Marika married to Godfrey and then Radigan married to Renala and then Marika. That's sort of why I drew the conclusion that the armbands might signify marriage. And so this statue of Marika holding baby Mesmer, only having 1 armband, to me at that time I would think, okay, well maybe Marika would have been wed to Godfrey at that time. I also find it interesting that these statues of Radigan have him at the base of a tree, like he's coming out of these tree branches, and Marika, her statues all have the same exact swirl behind them. And I think that the difference here shows that they were 2 different types of entity that were merged together.
And speaking on that point, and Kitetails might talk about this, but just in case she doesn't, okay, maybe she will. Maybe not the way that I want to, though. Of course, I don't have the dialogue to go with this. So just on the off chance she doesn't get to it, if Marika represents the Erdtree, because of course she would represent the Erdtree, then do the winding, twisting, I don't want to call them thorn-like branches spiraling around Radagon represent the kind of base of the Shadow Tree, because it does look very reminiscent of what you see, especially on the artistic map version of the Shadowlands. I don't think... Did I take a photo of the Shadowlands themselves? Probably not. Or no, I meant the map. Yeah, I don't think I have the map on its own. Oh yeah, of course I don't have the map because I haven't bothered to try to scale them together, I don't think. Either way, all of my stuff is not labeled. I need to remember to like label this stuff over the weekend or something. Because it'd be much easier to cross-reference some things. No, sorry. Not the lattice. That's a good question. I meant the like root-like branches coming from the bottom. They kind of look like Miranda flowers on the Radagon icon. And I do think it's a very strong possibility that Radagon is the figure represented in similar statues that lead from like Raya Lucaria up into Lanedell and within Lanedell proper. And I know I definitely have photos of that. So let me go into my folder. And that's the one that we, as a community, had kind of been calling the Crucible statue for a while. Okay, this might work. Okay, this will work. Let's do it this way. Now, obviously, he's posing differently, but there is a little bit of a similarity between the branches between the two. Wait a second, is this a second stalk? I guess stuff that I was taking for granted before. Anyway, I mean, it doesn't really matter too much. So the whole point that I'm kind of dancing around is Radagon more directly affiliated with the Shadow Tree than Marika's Erdtree? I mean, in many ways, he is literally Marika's shadow, which I don't want to kind of rely on that abstract of a symbolism for my arguments, but I mean, sometimes you have to take the cheap shots where you can. Jack tried to swipe up on a YouTube video. Did you super like it? So let me see if there's the causality comment. And Captini, welcome back in. I saw you earlier. You kind of think so, but you're not committed to the idea? Fair enough. And then Quasi Dingo, welcome on in. Grass in the Shadowlands are called Radafruit, which may mean nothing, but you thought it may connect to Radagon. Yeah, that's true too. I mean, for all intents and purposes, pun intended, it just felt like such a low-hanging fruit that I dare not touch it. So, you might have a point with that regardless. Right, so was it Elmo? Okay, and then you were saying you think of the context of vows and keeping versus breaking them as proxy to intent, whether genuine or not, comma. I guess I'll need the full message to understand. Discerning Tarnish thinks Radagon could represent the part of Marika's being that she disposed of and wouldn't want associated with true godhood. I think towards the end, yes, but I am curious about that relationship during their marriage. Okay, let's go on with the video.
And that might also be a hint about what's going on with the shadow tree here as well, because it sort of looks like you have the same kind of spiral clasp joining it together. I think that this statue we see in Ener Elim of these two figures together, of this entwining rope, this entwining structure around them, blending them together, I think this is signifying the creation of Marika. This is the romanticized version of the jar worship. This is what they thought it was. This, oh, look how beautiful the blending of life is. Look how beautiful the spiral braiding people together is. When in reality, we know what it looked like. We know it was violent and it was gruesome and it was nothing like what they presented it to be. Marika may have even been told that she was born of a beautiful spiral, a beautiful blending. And she didn't find out the truth about what really happened. She didn't find out about what actually went into her creation until later. And she may have been disgusted and started planning to divest herself of these things that were inside of her, that were blended with her. Because I don't think Marika, I don't think she was a bloodthirsty, hungry, cruel queen. I don't think she was mean, and I don't think she had these qualities within her naturally. We know she didn't. When you go to Shaman Village and you find the minor Erdtree there, it says that it was the secret incantation of Queen Marika, only the kindness of gold without order. And the song here, the harp, the isolated harp from the theme song we know so well, the entrance to that song, the beginning to that song, the harp before the big orchestral, before Radagon's theme starts. I think that is supposed to be a hint about Marika and Radagon, the kindness of gold without order. Marika.
And yeah, it is a really nice environmental detail, if you can call it that. I guess it's not technically part of the environments, but I mean, not in a literal sense, but it certainly sets the scene regardless, is that it's a lone harp, which could help represent the loneness of Marika being like the last survivor of her village or whatnot.
Was the kindness of gold that was blended into order. Radagon was that order. She split off those aspects that she didn't want, and she put them into her children. She put it into Radagon. She put them into living beings because they were parts of her. And I think that is what happened here. And I think that was why Marika was so fractured at the end. I don't think Marika could truly ever return to what she really was. I don't think that was possible for her. But I think this statue right here that we see is essentially Marika and Radagon being blended. That is at least what I believe it is supposed to represent. And we always wondered, why is Radagon Marika? How can two beings exist in the same vessel? Is Radagon a mimic tear? Did Marika pretend to be Radagon and she dress up like Radagon? No, I think Radagon was a living being that was blended with her. And it's possible that when Marika hid away the snake aspect of herself in baby Mesmer, she might have also split off Radagon at that point as well. And that's why Radagon isn't mentioned until the First Liurnian War. She split off the fire giant aspect, the smithing, the misbegotten aspect of herself. And one by one, all of her children had all of these features and characteristics that were blended into her that she didn't want. And as for that line in the story trailer about the seduction and how this references to the one strumpet accusations, this makes me wonder if the seduction may have possibly been of Godfrey, Horalu, and maybe Marika was the one that sought him out. And she
So, thoughts on this imagery here for a second. Let's try to get him back on screen. Oh, I guess he's further back.
Children.
All right. So, when Radagon has the seal placed on him by Marika, his snakes are red tinted or red hued, which could imply like a Radagon type situation going on, because red is typically affiliated with Radagon. But when he discards that seal of grace, he becomes white-skinned, or white-scaled, I guess. But my question is, does red represent sealing, and then unsealing being white therefore represent Marika? And that might tie into whole like the alchemical stuff that we talked about with Max the Rat's video. But I'm thinking about it in a slightly different context of like whether or not sealing, so if he's more akin to Radagon because of the sealing thing, and therefore can we by extension compare the sealing of the Shadow Tree and the Shadowland to a Radagon type situation on behalf of Marika? Or is that just a bit of a stretch there? I tend to think it's a stretch, but just, thought crossed my mind. Pixie said, quote, "Stonehammer made in the lands of the Newman, outside the lands between, the tool with which Marika shattered the Elden Ring. What the frick is this? The shaman village was in the lands between." So, yes, but at the time of this narrated description, the lands of the Newman are not in the lands between because they are in the realm of Shadow. So it may have once been part of the lands between, but is now no longer. And a parallel for that kind of idea might be how, like, Germany used to be divided into East and West Germany, with East and West Berlin being within within East Germany. And so, like, West Berlin was technically part of West Germany, but it itself was in East Germany. So that might be the kind of situation that's going on with the Shadowlands, if that makes any modicum of sense. And then Dylan, welcome back in. You really like how complex they made Marika as a character? She's really interesting. I don't, because we just don't understand any of these characters' motivations, and that frustrates me. Nightbot said it was a stretch. Oh no, you got me. Aaron has no idea, but you do think it's one of Radagon's aspects with the thorny sealing of things. Yes. You understand what I'm saying? You're not sure you agree, but maybe. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at as well, to be fair.
All of these features and characteristics that were blended into her that she didn't want. And as for that line in the story trailer about the seduction and how this references to the one strumpet accusations, this makes me wonder if the seduction may have possibly been of Godfrey, Horalu, and maybe Marika was the one that sought him out, and she recognized in him this ferocious zeal for bloodlust. Maybe she saw with
We're going to need to look up the Acts of Godfrey description real quick. Where it is. Acts of God. Okay. This weapon is symbolic of Godfrey's vow to conduct himself as a lord, later becoming an emblem of the golden lineage. In the days of the past, a crown was warranted with strength. One moment, trying to look up something else. Godfrey icon quotes, Godfrey was a ferocious warrior. When he vowed to become a lord, he took the beast regent Sarash upon his back to suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within. The Badlands? Horaloo, chieftain of the Badlands. I was wondering whether or not Godfrey could have potentially become Godfrey earlier than we thought. And if he wasn't really Horaloo when Marika and Godfrey were trying to establish their order of the Erdtree. And so could the Corncent have already been conquered by Godfrey? So the seduction could have been of Godfrey. Could the betrayal have been toward Godfrey himself in tarnishing them? An affair from which gold arose. I don't like that, but I mean, it could be Golden Order. So I know out of context saying it's the Golden Order is like, well, that doesn't make sense for a number of reasons, but I think it's the Land of Shadow description which mentions that it is gold without order. Which implies like the Shadow Tree would have come from a time without order and therefore potentially have been predating the Golden Order. And so then does the Shadow Tree predate the Golden Order? And that can really mess with people's understandings of the timelines there. I am of the opinion that the Golden Order came later. And I don't think the DLC has changed my opinion on that. I tend to think that it's synonymous with Radagon. Seduction and the betrayal. I'm struggling. Queen Marika lover calls Mikolash trumpet too. He seduces Mogan Radon. And then Elmo says, do I think this thorn sealing the tree and the crucible thorn sorcery being created from abandonment are related? Being created from abandonment? I'm not sure what you're asking there. And what do you... The Crucible Thorn Sorcery. I wouldn't call that the Crucible Thorn Sorcery. I would just call it like the Thorn Sorceries. Or are you talking about the Thorn Incantation Sorceries? Like the Shadow... The Thorns of Impenetrable... The Impenetrable Thorn Sorcery? Or something else? Pixie thinks he became Godfrey when he married Marika before the wars. That's kind of what I was thinking for a long time, because it says when he vowed to become a lord. Because, I mean, to become a lord, in my mind, would imply that there was the Elden Ring to become the lord of. Actually, I guess I never really thought about it this way. Him vowing to become a lord implies that he understands what lordship is, doesn't it? So he and Marika knowingly did something to make him become a lord, and so they would have needed to have taken it, potentially by force, to do so. Although that last part's a stretch. Maybe it didn't have to happen by force. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, discerning, that it's possible the betrayal is using Godfrey to establish the order of the Erdtree and stripping him of grace when he was of no more use to Marika. I do think that that could be it. An affair from which gold arose. Okay. Wait, let me. Okay. I'm gonna double check the Japanese trailer real quick. I should have like. Wait, do I have the script for this? I don't think I do. No, I don't. Oh wait, no, I do. Okay. In the beginning, there was temptation and betrayal. Thus was Goldborn and was Shadowborn. Hold on. Hajimari wa yuwaku to uragiri datta. Oh. Can it be read that way? Maybe? Okay. So I'm just going to copy it into chat now. Oh, wait, no, I don't need to do that. I can share my screen with you guys. So, kind of used to doing the lore through where my monitor is being used by the PS5. Okay. So, I have, you can ignore the, part after here, I guess. Because I'm mostly just focused on like the first half. So going by what I have here, Mikola has said in the beginning there was temptation and betrayal. Gold. Well, through that, Gold was born, and still kind of it's kind of hard to like make that literal. Kage was also born, or Shadow was also born. Kage. My fault. The weird thing about this is I thought this was talking about a sequential order of events, which it might be doing in a way, but it doesn't have to be a simultaneous event, or like this doesn't have to happen all at once, I guess could be one way to read this. So in the beginning there was the temptation, and betrayal makes it sound like that happens at the very beginning, like this should be one event, but it could also be saying that, how do I phrase this? There was gold and then there was betrayal, but that doesn't necessarily mean it happened at the same time. So, or sorry, did I say gold? So there's temptation, and then there could be an unknown lapse of time, and then there could have been a betrayal. Could be a potential way of reading this after all, which it's not what I would have expected based off of this. And I think the English can be read the similar way there. And through that was Gold born, and still was Shadow also born. Now, to me, this makes it sound, on a first reading, that Gold and Shadow were literally born at the same time. But now I'm wondering that if the temptation and betrayal don't necessarily have to happen at the same time, could this just be mirroring the concepts? So it was through that was Gold born, i.e. the temptation, and also was Shadow born, specifically through the betrayal. Now this, I don't like this, because it's like, why the hell do we have to play such 5D chess to understand what should be the most like straightforward part of like pretty much anything we've received. But I don't like it. But it also makes too much sense. And I feel like I run into this issue all the freaking time in the FromSoft games, and I feel like I'm gaslighting myself that it's like, oh, well, if you read certain things a certain way, it's going to be different, which it's like, no crap, Sherlock. Of course, if you read it differently, it's going to be different, but I don't like that in many ways it seems to be obtuse for obtuse's sake, that there's too many like linguistic ambiguities that can allow for alternative interpretations, which takes things in completely different directions, which tend to make sense within the context of these alternative interpretations, but just nobody can like really be on board with just taking things at face value, at least in English alone. Because even in Japanese, that's not how I would read what I'm saying it as. So, zoinks. Hopefully, does that make sense to you guys? I mean, if not linguistically, does the idea make sense? So let me rephrase that point. Does the overall thematic idea that the betrayal could have happened later to the temptation, which could have happened way earlier, make sense? In and of itself as a concept, not relating to this passage alone. And then the second follow-up would be, then linguistically, do you think that makes sense? Although obviously you guys can't work with that. Do I have the official? I don't think I have the official English. I should probably put it in here. Pixie asks, is the seduction Radagon? The affair produces Mesmer and a snake, which is the shadow needed for gold. So I'm thinking potentially that whether or not it's the betrayal being Mesmer, we do have a potential burning of the Erdtree tying into Mesmer's kindling and the so-called first or original sin, which has been a bit of a hot topic in the Discord as of late. But it's a little bit clearer in the English that the cardinal sin and the original sin refer to burning the Erdtree. And then Stella, welcome back into the stream. Discerning thinks Siraj was originally part of the Shadow Realm. There's just a lot of lion-related beasts out there. So I think Siraj is part of Stormvale, but the issue is that they were all connected to the Shadow Realm. And so they might all be tied together there. It would have been nice if we had more storms with the Anir Elim to tie it into the true storm raging over Stormvale back in the day. But maybe the two locations could have been near each other. Impact said, should we also consider the person saying this quote? You think it's Letta, so it might have some bias. Yeah, it does seem as though it should be Letta, and it might have bias. I am aware of that. But then, even though I do it often, I really do hate discrediting a lot of NPC dialogue without substantial reason to believe otherwise. So one of the NPCs that I am more amenable to disregarding what they say at times would be Gideon, because he's operating off of inference and he doesn't have the full picture, which I think is pretty clear based off of what he does know and doesn't know and the actions that he takes because of that stuff. And his own biases stop him from actually getting to the truth. Whereas Roger, I don't think he lies to us. I think he tells us what he knows. And even he relays to us that he's heard this from other sources. And so it's kind of secondhand information even to him. So, yeah. Aaron says, that's their style of storytelling, right? But you've heard a lot of people say Elden Ring is particularly egregious. Sort of yes, sort of no. Some stuff is translation. Other stuff is what I would call interpretation. Because even the Japanese isn't very clear. I think Bloodborne might be one of the better examples of why it's so messed up. Because that game just kind of doesn't make sense until you get dev interviews to make sense of things. But yeah. Hilko said, with text that short, it's hard to avoid though, and part of the point. It's frustrating. Hilko says, biblically, at least temptation and betrayal are worlds apart. Well, not necessarily, because you could say that, like, a temptation is a betrayal of an expectation that somebody should have of somebody else, perhaps. Sorry that sounds so damn abstract and not as clear as I want. So let's go back to, like, the marriage parallel there. If, and don't take this as, like, an actual canonical event. Let's just say this is a thought experiment. Okay, let's say that M40F, damn it, let's not do a dumbass Reddit post. Let's say that Marika was married to Godfrey, and she was tempted by the promise of becoming like Radagon and like having him be her lord after Godfrey stopped doing work around the house, I guess. Then her being tempted by a new consort is an implicit betrayal of the relationship that she would have as wife to Godfrey, the current lord. So they could be separate, or they could be essentially the exact same thing. And then Aim Punched, welcome back in. That's always been the point. Rip. And Sugi, welcome on into the stream. Could you trade with someone for a Gravelstone? It does help if you tell us what system you're on, but good luck with that. I certainly don't have the game loaded right now. Our Crusader says, it doesn't really contradict anything, so you'd say the hypothesis is fine and gives a bit more wiggle room for things. And that's the part that sucks, though, like, that it makes sense. I know that it sounds kind of weird to say that, but sometimes it makes things neater to have them more closed off and not open even more wiggle room in this Pandora's box of lore. MK always thought seduction and betrayal were different events that both led to the ascension. And so, right, the whole thing about the ascension, and I might not have made this clear, this might not be entirely pertinent to your comment, but I just wanted to clarify just in case that Gold may have been born with the temptation, whereas Shadow may have also been born via the betrayal, and the temptation and the betrayal may not be one act, but two different acts. Whereas I had kind of thought that because of the greater context, that all four of these things are essentially one grand idea. Yeah, so that's what Discerning Tarnished is saying. Dylan asks, is Mesmer a possible Jon Snowish analog? I'm not sure which version of Jon Snow you mean, whether you're talking about the book version or the television series. But I'm assuming the book, and I don't know enough about that lineage thing and like the prince that was promised to say. But yeah. And then Pixie had a schizo brain blast. Is the Elden Ring the same as the lands between? When Destined Death is plucked, it plucks the land of shadow where death is. When the ring is smashed, the lands are smashed. So yeah, I had that thought myself, and Teen Sith on the Discord has also brought up the possibility that the Shadow Tree is like literally the insides of the Erdtree. So going back to the Elden Ring symbolism there, if the Rune of Death was plucked out, okay, let's pull up a good old MS Paint to make this example make a bit more sense. Yeah, let's do this one. And this. No, that's not how that works. Not for this ring. Not for this ring. I'm working way too hard on this. Anyway, I did this wrong. So what, I need to like put this over here. And then this one over here. Something like that. Okay, this is the Elden Ring. And let's take let's do this. Rune of Death. And this will be good enough. Let's take the Rune of Death. Oh, I need transparency. I don't even know how to do that in this version of MS Paint. Oh, transparent selection. Okay. So let's take the Rune of Death out of the Elden Ring. You literally pluck it out, let's say like beneath it or whatnot. Then does it kind of get inverted and go underneath the lands between? Is this essentially the Shadow Tree? Of course, we've got a lot of other weird things to go along with, like the Rune of Death and Deathroot producing its own kind of like third tree, I guess. Maybe that's like the second stalk surrounding the Erdtree or the Shadow Tree, but I don't want to go like down that route. And so if the Erdtree itself had been a thing and the Rune of Death was part of it, if we plucked that out, could that explain the hollowing in the Erdtree? Now that is Teen Sith's idea. I don't know how well that works, but I think it's interesting enough to talk about. Although, to be fair, I did misrepresent Teen Sith's idea a little bit because I don't think she really buys into the whole like land being the separator. Like, I don't think she believes that the Shadow Tree is literally upside down from the Erdtree. So that's just a little bit of a liberty on my part, to be fair. But yeah. Thank you, Aim Punched. And then Captini thinks Gideon Ofnir is a version of Odin's story. And he's, yeah, I know that's a pseudonym for Odin. He didn't want the cycle to continue because he was only the one keeping the memories between the cycles. So I thought Odin knew that eventually the Age of the Gods would have to come to an end. And in order to fulfill like the prophecy of Ragnarok, he knew he would like have to leave the realm into the hands of men. And he chose like his champions essentially to do it. And they would eventually succeed them all at the end of the battle. Tesla logo's the Rune of Death? I guess this is a Tesla logo. Sure. Drive around in a Cybertruck. You're asking for it. And then Operator was hoping for something more specific or mechanistic. Like a betrayal could be an affair leading to the birth of a child, or stealing something from the horn scent, etc. I tend to think that the so-called mechanism, if I'm following your point correctly here, would be the burning of the Erdtree to create different lords for their Elden Lords. So, for example, when we become Lord, Melina says we need to commit a cardinal sin for the sake of the Lord of the New Age or something like that. And so, to me, that signifies, if this is how we become an Elden Lord, should that not also be the process in which Radagon became Elden Lord? Or is there something else going on because Radagon's situation is special because of his literal and metaphorical proximity to Marika? And then to extend that analogy further, then did Godfrey also have to burn a tree to become Elden Lord? Is that the first cardinal sin mentioned of by Ania? And that also brings in the question of, like, are these all individual ages each ushered in by their own cardinal sins? And does that become like the first sin of each age? If that makes sense to you guys? Anyway. Exactly. Discerning tarnished. Pixie says, and that is where the sap went? The Shadow Tree has the sap and the Erdtree loses it? Potentially. Nothing more embarrassing than getting critted by an NPC. My condolences, Corn. And nice to see you again. Okay, I see what you're saying, Captini. All right. All right, so, man, what a tangent. So, yeah, just to kind of recap all of that, I don't know, but now I'm really going to have to play with the idea that the temptation was the beginning, and the betrayal doesn't necessarily have to go along with the literal temptation, which created gold, and the betrayal could have been what actually created Shadow there. So, the beginning was temptation and betrayal. Yeah, that's just not how I would naturally read it, though. But we also don't know what exactly he's referring to about, like, the beginning. This is coming from Letta. So could she be talking about Mikola's beginning? I don't think that would work because of Mikola's great rune talking about trying to transcend the causality of the beginning, essentially, the karma of everything connecting to the beginning. It's all. So the way that I'll explain my conundrum now is that pretty much everything, when you stop and think about it, at least for me, seems to be pointing to Radagon being like the central focus of things pertaining to the Shadow Tree rather than Godfrey, in a similar way that Radagon is always central to the Golden Order rather than Godfrey, as far as like the text and things are concerned. But the first-hand impressions of everything that's ever been related to us or relayed to us through Elden Ring makes it seem as though like this should all be like the beginning of the Erdtree era and tie into Godfrey. So it's like, do you follow your heart / first impressions or your brain and the Radagon stuff? And I'm not trying to say like people who don't believe the Radagon connections are brainless. I'm just saying that is my current dilemma. And it's, oh, damn, we've almost spent 2 hours on this video alone. Was not expecting that. Thanks, Kite Tails. No, it's all good. Hilko asks, was I by any chance not raised religious? It's complicated. So I grew up in a Roman Catholic household, but I didn't particularly like buy into it from a very young age. So by 10 years old, I was an atheist and was more or less in the closet because of a very religiously active like grandma, and you could just say kind of like stereotypical Roman Catholic family. And Vorb, nice to see you again. And then Discerning Tarnish says, every order must commit a cardinal sin because it involves the manipulation of free will by a god. I wouldn't necessarily take in that parallel to Elden Ring because I do try to treat it as secularly as I can on that front. And I don't want to get into the whole things about free will, especially when we have a lot of ambiguities brought into Elden Ring, specifically because of the concept of like the greater will and whatnot. What if she's really talking about Mikola seducing and then betraying Moog? I don't think that works because I don't believe that's when Shadow would have been created, but interesting thought. Hilka says, you mean Radagon was more central to things and it's just hidden from us? Kind of, but like the thing is, I don't really feel like the Radagon stuff is hidden from us as much as it is like the way that it's presented, it seems like all of this stuff should tie into Marika and her ascension to power, which kind of implies Godfrey. But I feel like when you actually look at the details and start putting pieces together, you get into that whole gold mask revelation of Marika is Radagon, if that makes a good example or a good analogy. Hey Gabriel, welcome on in. Tia has a great video on the first burning of the Erdtree. I wholeheartedly disagree because he puts it at the timeline of the actual shattering, and to me that's just nonsense, to put it bluntly. So sorry if I'm pooping on one of your favorite lore tubers, but I'm over it. Pixie was raised in a Golden Order fundamentalist household, but you do not support the Mending Rune of Perfect Order. Understandable. Hilko was thinking hidden in the sense that he was in charge, overtly, for much longer than we see because Marika was kind of the figurehead. And that's what I'm trying to figure out now, because, like, regardless of how I feel about, like, Radagon and the Golden Order, we don't really get a lot of his direct inclusion into the lore of the Shadowlands, because the Carians in the Shadowlands seem relatively disconnected from what's going on with House Caria, and they don't really seem to have like a direct role. How do I phrase it? Like the Crusade doesn't seem to have been directed by Radagon as much as it does Marika, and that raises the question of like, how does this tie into the Golden Order then, if it needs to be born around the time of the Crusades? And what I mean by like the time of the Crusades, well, that might not be saying it well, but like between like the sealing of the Shadow Tree, or the Shadow Realm might be a better way of saying it. Okay. Alrighty. So that was one hell of a tangent there, but let's go ahead and go on back into the video. And thank you all for sticking around through that.
Within him, the figure that could lead her army.
I'm going to back up to this timestamp.
About the seduction and how this references to the one strumpet accusations. This makes me wonder if the seduction may have possibly been of Godfrey, Horalu, and maybe Marika was the one that sought him out, and she recognized in him this ferocious zeal for bloodlust. Maybe she saw within him the figure that could lead her armies, that could get her where she needed to be in accordance of her goals. The same way that Mikla saw within Radon a strong consort.
Okay, right. So just to go back to that whole idea which spurned off that crazy derailed train of thought would be, could Godfrey have gotten Sarash earlier than what is, I'm assuming, commonly thought with like him vowing to become a lord with Marika? And also, building off of that thought, why do both Godfrey and Marika like know what it means to like vow to become a lord before the Elden Ring is in their possession? And of course, we've got like the depiction of the Elden Ring and Farum Azula to consider and everything. But yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of ambiguities about that.
And the parallels between Radon and Godfrey are very strong. They were established in the base game, but also just the way that Radon really idolizes Godfrey, taking upon his same image of the lion. And lions are very, very esteemed and important and divine in Hornsent culture. They are all...
That's an interesting point in a roundabout way. Hello, girl. Thinking about Mikla, he charms people and can place grace on the eyes of his followers like Letta. And I guess I took it for granted, but that really isn't dissimilar from what Marika and Radagon can do at all with their Source and Scarsteels. So perhaps the apple doesn't fall far from the tree after all, because they're plant people.
Over Ener Elim, all of these statues of lions with omen horns. The divine beast has the visage of a lion. And Godfrey is assigned Sarosh, this lion, this king, this lion king.
Oh yeah, so sorry, I didn't finish my thought. So if Mikola needed to charm Radahn to become his lord, and that's a big if, then did Marika charm Godfrey to become her lord? And then does tarnishing him of his grace just actually be because she's breaking the charm on him and like releasing him because he's no longer useful? Because she's stealing it back? I don't know. Need to think about that. Yeah, Aaron said, we wish we could have gotten a nod to what Godfrey was in the Age of Belurot. What his tie to the Crucible was. For real, man. I feel that. Oh, dunk dunk.
To satiate this bloodlust, to keep it in check. And so I think what may be the case here, Godfrey Horlu might have been a Highland warrior. He might have just been a resident in the vicinity of this area, close to the Hornsent occupations. And Marika might have sought him out. He may have not been appropriate for her. He may have not been a good pick for the chosen Empyrean saint that the Hornsent created. And maybe that is what the Empyrean Grandam's comments are about, the strumpet. How dare she seduce this savage man who would end up bringing havoc upon us? Because this scene in the story trailer with all of this blood and this...
God, I just love this scene. This is like so peak. I just wish we had like more to go with it. Or like even just like a cinematic in the game itself. Something.
Destruction, all of this violence that we see. I don't think that Marika had that within her to carry out on her own. I think she had help. And who do we know that bathes himself in blood, who relishes in violence? That's Godfrey. This scene right here, this seems like something Godfrey would be capable of doing. And so with the whole distinction between Horlu and Godfrey even seems like this is a Hornsent makeover. He has braids in his hair. He has this lion attached to him. This is maybe how they made him respectable. Okay, Marika, if you want to marry Godfrey, if he's going to be your lord, let's make him respectable. And that's how Horlu got his makeover. I've always thought that Marika and Godfrey had really strong Samson and Delilah vibes. And Samson was a biblical figure. He was a Nazarite that was granted unbound strength by God, but he made a vow.
Because of his dreads. Believe it or not, that's kind of what people believe his hairstyle would have been. It's all tied to braids, baby.
You will have strength as long as you never cut your hair. And Delilah was a woman from a group of people that Samson was not supposed to marry. And she ended up kind of seducing him and tricking him into cutting his hair, which was the downfall of her people. It was also what led to Samson's death. I just get Samson and Delilah vibes from Marika and Godfrey. I always have. Even the first beast that Samson kills is a lion. He kind of pulls it apart, and might be a reference to Godfrey pulling apart Sarosh. And the whole idea about Horlu being made over to be this respectable lord worthy of marrying this goddess really...
You know, looking back at the etymology of Sarash with like Sarosha, or however it's pronounced, I didn't know how well it tied into the base game because there was nothing to really tie a lot. Well, I mean, there's not a lot of Sarash lore to begin with, but what I believe the etymology of Sarash's name comes from would be Srosha? Sraosha? I don't know. It's the Avesta name of the Zoroastrian Yazata of conscience and observance, which is also the literal meaning of his name. So, like, in many ways, Sarash is the conscience of Horlu / Godfrey, which, you know, very well. That part was fine. It's the teacher of Dana. Dana being the hypostasis of both conscience and religion, and guardian / companion over the Chinvat Bridge. So I didn't understand if there was any connection between Sarash and some bridge because we didn't have that in the base game. But thinking about it now, I should probably make this bigger for you guys. But thinking about it now, the Chinvat Bridge, Bridge of Judgment, or beam-shaped bridge, or the Bridge of the Requider in Zoroastrianism, is the sifting bridge which separates the world of the living from the world of the dead. All souls must cross the bridge upon death. The bridge is guarded by two four-eyed dogs, described in the Vendidad as that, the two bridge guarding dogs. Do we have anything analogous to the bridge guarding dogs in Shadow of the Erdtree? The sculpted keeper, there's two of them, and obviously like the lion dance isn't exactly like a dog, but I mean it kind of looks a little bit dog-like. And there's even the depiction of the lion has like another beast within it, so that it's two as one. Am I onto something? Am I cooking, chat? The bridge's appearance varies depending on the observer's asha or righteousness. Oh, damn, it's like dark and bright in the trailer. As related in the text known as Bunda Hissen, if a person has been wicked, the bridge will appear narrow and the demon Chinafapast will emerge and drag their soul into Drudge Damana, the House of Lies, a place of eternal punishment and suffering similar to the concept of hell. If a person's good thoughts, words, and deeds in life are many, the bridge will be wide enough to cross, and the Dana, a spirit representing revelation, will appear and lead the soul into Garo Damana, the House of Song. These souls that successfully cross the bridge are united with Ahura Mazda. And I have like a vague familiarity with Ahura Mazda, mostly because of Final Fantasy, but I don't remember enough about it other than it being like a Persian god, so I might need to look into this. Often the Chinvat Bridge is identified with the rainbow or with the Milky Way galaxy, such as in Professor C.P. Tiela's History of Religion. However, other scholars such as C.F. Kiri and Ferdinand Justy disagree with this interpretation, citing descriptions of the Chinvat Bridge as straight upward rather than curvilinear. Oh boy. So, the Milky Way galaxy thing makes me think of the Greater Will and whatnot. Three divinities are thought to be guardians of the Chinvat Bridge: Saraosha, Mithra, Covenant, and Rashnu, Justice. Could this be analogous to Mikola and Radon? We're going off on a rabbit hole adventure, guys. Let me check out the chat. And Punch always found Godfrey so boring. Sriracha? Yep, he's spicy. There are two divine beasts. Sort of. Yeah, you are kind of right. Well, we also see a lot more in the trailer. Keep cooking? Okay. Zoroastrian. Thank you, Stella. He's proto-Jesus, right? Mithra is? Yes. First major monotheistic religion with a strong dualist concept of good versus evil. You like this? Cook away, good sir. I mean, y'all are live because I have not dove into this. Dived into this? I have not dove into this before. So an Iranian deity of covenants, light, oaths, justice, the sun, contracts, and friendship. Ooh. Guardian of cattle, harvest waters. Mitram to bind, causing to... That which causes binding. Man, why is this gotta be like matching like this? Because this... Obviously it's not perfect, but it's like, man, I don't want to really have to tie it to a real world religion. It's more fun to look at it symbolically. Bridge of separation that all souls must cross. Mithra is not a psychopomp, a god of souls to the place of the dead. Should the good thoughts, words, and deeds outweigh the bad, Saraosha alone conveys the soul across the bridge. We don't really get Sarash at the end of the DLC. But I'm thinking about this because, like, the Lord's soul is meant to be the guiding factor to make the God's soul return. So Godfrey acted like that for Marika originally, and that would also, like, bring in Sarash through the Godfrey connection. Never resting. Interesting. Yeah, I'm not going to spend too much more time on this, but it might be worth delving into more. Yeah, because there's too much irrelevant info for me to, like, keep doing this on stream. I'm not too worried about that. Let's look at Rashnu real quick. He's the Avestan language names. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Together, 3 judges who pass judgment on the souls of people after death. His standard appellation is the Very Straight. In Buddha Hishin, a Zoroastrian account of creation finished in the 11th or 12th century, Rashnu is identified as an assistant of the Amesha Spenta, Emeritat, immortality. In a subsequent passage, Rashnu is described as the essence of truth that prevents devas from destroying material creation. Rashnu adjudges even the souls of men and women as to bad deeds and good deeds. As one says, Rashnu shall not see thither the rank of the judge who delivers false judgment. So, going, like, super symbolically here, I wonder if this could be tied to the way that Radon forestalled fate in the stars to, like, stop evil devas like the falling star beasts, perhaps, but that's a pretty big stretch. And there's nothing else about this guy. Cool. All right. Is the assistant of Amesha Spenta. All right. Yeah, I think we'll be done with that part for now. Stella says you don't know if you'd call Mithra Proto-Jesus. Understandable, yeah. This deep dive into Mesopotamian culture could be right in line with TA's recent video. See how quickly I discarded it? All right. Going back to the video now.
It makes me wonder if that was the seduction and then the betrayal was of the horn scent that they both participated in. And maybe Marika made a vow to Horlu. If you marry me, if you become my consort, and you help me get revenge on what was done to my people, I will make you my lord. You are going to be the template for the mightiest warriors, the tarnished. We are going to fill the earth, you and I. If you make this vow to me, if you promise to follow me. The horn-sent Grandam curses Marika in some of her dialogue. She says, a curse upon this strumpet's progeny, upon Marika's children, each and all, the curse.
I was like, is this Dark Souls 3? This looks so much like the Lothric Knight Sword, and the angle of this altar kind of reminded me of like where you go to fight Midir. I was just like, what? Because this also vaguely looks like the Elite Knight set, but it's certainly not.
Of the omen shall strike thee down in the form of the sacred beast's ire. And then you see Marika and Godfrey's children, Moog and Margit. And you have to wonder, is that the curse of the omen that the Imperium Grandam was talking about, which would now link Marika and Godfrey to this catastrophic event at the Divine Gate. And you see all of these horn scent that have been melded together, and it doesn't seem that this was of their own will. It's kind of giving Pompeii vibes. I can absolutely get behind the idea that Marika made a vow to Godfrey. She seduced him. Thus, the comment about the strumpet, the wantonness of Marika using her feminine guile to get Godfrey into carrying this out for her, and them both betraying the horn scent. And to me, this scene at the Divine Gate seems like such a targeted attack on the horn scent. This is screaming, I'm going to do to you what you did to my people. How does it feel to be whipped up and braided together and blended together? This is one big amalgamation of just horn scents that were collected and merged into something that Marika needed. And if you look up at the top, you actually see braids, and they sort of look like the same material and shape as what is blending the two figures together. And I really wonder if that is exactly what we are seeing here, is just a repeat of what the horn scent did to the shaman and did to so many other. They did it to their own people as well. This just seems like a very specific and targeted revenge. I noticed in this image from the digital art book that it looks like the sap from the shadow tree was meant to be collected in this massive bowl here. And this location on the map is called the Shadow Tree Chalice. And if you take a few steps back, it seems like this massive ceremonial wall is sculpted like a bowl as well, as if it's meant to be viewed from a distance to give the illusion of this sap being poured into this communion vessel. But this bowl is bone dry. There is no sap to be found here. And I wonder if this is a hint about why the Age of Plenty stopped so suddenly.
Yeah, and I don't know how much I've shared this idea, but I've wondered whether or not that so-called second stalk of the Shadow Tree is essentially meant to represent Radagon, literally sealing the Erdtree so that way its sap stopped flowing for others. But I guess that'll be up for y'all to decide. God, this area is weird, yeah.
If the holy blessings stopped flowing from one tree, the same would have happened to the other tree. I think there is a lot here to think about. I could go on, but I want to just go ahead and wrap this up. And I'd love to hear your feedback on this. I know this is a very long, lengthy discussion, but as this clicked into place for me, I just got so excited about sharing it that I just wanted to be able to get it out there. So I'd love to know what your thoughts are, your feedback, and tell me if this makes sense, because it makes a lot of sense to me. It does open up a lot of other questions, but I kind of feel like we're getting a little closer. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Thank you to my channel members for your support, as always, for my videos. And I will see you all next time. Bye.
All right, yeah, so that was a really nice video. I'm going to go ahead and share it with you guys in the chat now, as per usual. And just to give a recap, I think the idea that Marika is kind of like a parallel to Sephiroth is an attractive one that I'm still on the fence about, just because we don't have that full-on connection that I'd like to be confident in such ideas. But I do think it is just as good as any other idea for explaining the relationship between Marika and the horn scent. Especially with the so-called betrayal, it would definitely make a lot of sense that she could have been secreted away or spirited away from the shaman village as a child, and like the horn scent could have been using her for some purposes. I don't necessarily buy into the whole Jaraka theory, but if the horn scent were using the shaman for their jarring practices, then it is certainly not beyond the realm of possibility and could potentially explain the odd dual nature of Marika. But to be fair, we still have this odd dualism with beings who are not put into jars, depending on how you feel about characters like Arena, Hayata, Shabiri, Yura, and even so far as the mother of all dragons, Grail, being kind of split between the 5 drakes around her in that fight, where if you kill all 5 of the little drakes, the big dragon will die, and if you kill the big dragon, then all 5 of the little drakes will die. So, multiplicity of personality is a real problem in Elden Ring. And Aaron, like the hair length differences in the statues? Oh, you find that the most compelling. And then Hell Yeah Gaming, welcome on in. You just saw this pop up and see that your video is next to the list to be viewed tonight? And it's next? Yeah. Welcome back into the stream. And yeah, so that wraps up Kite Tail's video. That took me a lot longer than I was expecting, but you know, sometimes that's how it goes. Okay, yeah, so we should have enough time for Hell Yeah Gaming's video, even if we go a little bit over tonight. So we'll definitely not get into those next two on the lists. And now after talking so much about Sirash, I'm curious if Eric's video is going to go down that crazy ass rabbit hole. All right. So with all that being said and done, let's watch. I solved Shadow of the Erdtree Elden Ring theory. And just to give a bit of a disclaimer to Hell Yeah Gaming, I frown on such claims. I dislike them quite a bit. So by all means, you feed the algorithm the best way you can, but it's just a little bit lost on me.
From the identity of the...
All right. Let's move that over. No. Alrighty, here we go.
From the identity of the glow-eyed queen to Marika's seduction and betrayal, I've got some answers for you today that I haven't heard anybody else talk about. So strap yourselves in, friends, settle down with a flask of crimson tears, because I am confident that I have solved some of the biggest mysteries in Elden Ring, and I am not joking. Hey all you heroes out there, I'm your professional protagonist and welcome back to Hell Yeah Gaming, where I am diving headfirst into theory crafting for the first time. I mean, in the past I've certainly reacted to and analyzed trailers, gave my predictions and hypotheses and whatnot, but as far as sitting down with all of the evidence and trying to piece something together in a narratively fulfilling way, this is a first for me, so please do be gentle. But before we get into all of that,
we're gonna be as rough as possible.
Shout out to the commenter of the day, Max Cube Gaming. Let's give Max Cube Gaming a great big hell yeah! And if you'd like to be featured as commenter of the day, well, then all you need to do is 1, subscribe to the channel, and 2, leave comments on my videos and community posts. But back to the reason why you clicked on this video. You see,
Alright, so I'm meaning this constructively, and I tend to be a bit of a hard ass about stuff like this. I can't think of the right word. So people in chat, you're free to contradict me if you feel differently, but I tend to skip over a lot of this stuff if I feel like it's not getting to the point as quickly as I'd like, and that might also hurt your viewer retention for the very beginning of the video, which is the kind of most important part of a video as far as like the YouTube algorithm is concerned. So I'd really consider truncating a lot of this stuff down if you want to pump up those bigger numbers. Oh yeah, and if people in chat actually like this kind of stuff, go ahead and let him know and say that I'm just being a jerk.
Discussing the lore of Shadow of the Erdtree over Facebook Messenger with my friend Max, as we very often do. No relation to the commenter of the day, Max. And I was rambling on, again, as I often do, when I suddenly stumbled into a couple of revelations I haven't seen or heard anybody else cover. More than that, I pulled out the smoking gun that, in my own mind at least, proves these revelations, and I had to immediately begin writing the script for this video out of sheer excitement. I believe I have uncovered all of the most important mysteries surrounding Marika's early days, and placed it all into a rough timeline. So, let's get started. By now, we all...
Okay, so yeah, Captini couldn't hear the video. I turned it down because of the intro being super loud, and also like when you're speaking a bit more animatedly, the sound balance was higher on that end, and when you're speaking a bit more normally, it's a lot lower. You can adjust that stuff a bit in the post. Some AI can like normalize the entire thing. I typically like, or rather, I should say, I prefer to cut off different chunks, isolating the parts that are a bit louder and manually lowering or raising them to be a bit more uniform in that regard. And then also just like the sound effect was a little bit loud. And I'm being a bit pedantic about this, not to like be mean or anything, but this is truly meant to be constructive and help you moving forward. And trying to help others learn from my mistakes and the things that I've learned as I've been producing this stuff. And of course, there's still more for me to learn and get better about myself.
all know that Marika originated in the Shaman village, which was devastated by the potentates of Bonnie village on order of the Horn-Scent culture, so their flesh could be used in the living jar ritual.
Yeah, like right here, you're speaking much more quietly, which is perfectly fine, but it would be better if you bumped that up in post. So I'm also going to like back up a bit, so that way I can actually pay attention to the argument a bit more, rather than the presentation of it right now.
And placed it all into a rough timeline. So let's get started. By now, we all know that Marika originated in the Shaman village, which was devastated by the potentates of Bonnie village on order of the Horn-Scent culture, so their flesh could be used in the living jar rituals. The topic has been beaten to death by every lore tuber out there, so I won't harp on it.
Hey, it's me, my only Shadow the Erdtree Lore video on that topic. Now, I don't blame you.
Instead, I want to focus on how we got to that point. Who could have ordered, or at the very least allowed, such a horrible practice? The Horn-Scent believed their horns to be a sign of divinity, a mark that they were touched by the crucible of life itself. And as such, had one hell of a superiority complex, just like all religious zealots do. However, it's not just the horns they felt were divine. This belief extends to most, if not all, forms of mixed species traits. After defeating Mesmer the Impaler, if you summoned Horn-Scent, or that is the person, not the people, you know, naming a specific NPC after an entire culture doesn't get confusing at all.
Yeah, that kind of bothers me myself, which is why I'm often like Horn-Scent, the NPC, which is also kind of equally annoying because there are many Horn-Scent NPCs, and then I add in like Letta's retinue, so it's just like qualifiers upon qualifiers trying to talk about the simple things. Even though most people will understand what I'm saying off the get-go, it's just kind of funny.
He comments on how Mesmer's snake form was sublime. He expresses disdain for the hypocrisy that Mesmer could seek the destruction of his people when the demigod himself was just like them. Okay, Pro, so what? I can hear you asking. What does this have to do with the god of the Crucible era you promised?
All right, I'm going to back up because I was a little bit distracted by my dog, and I think I disagree with this, but I want to make sure that I'm understanding you properly. My fault.
Person, not the people. You know, naming a specific NPC after an entire culture doesn't get confusing at all. He comments on how Mesmer's snake form was sublime. He expresses disdain for the hypocrisy that Mesmer could seek the destruction of his people when the demigod himself was just like them. Okay, bro.
Okay, yeah.
So what? I can hear.
I was missing the context of the horn scent NPC saying that. Okay, yeah. I blame the dog.
Hear you asking, what does this have to do with the god of the Crucible era you promised us? Well, I'm glad you asked, my non-existent hypothetical voice in the audience. If writhing snakes are the most base of us, as Hornsent puts it, then why not a serpent as their god? It is my belief that this thing, shown to us in the story trailer, was the god of this era. And
so that's a little bit unfortunate. I don't necessarily think that this is an idea that has to be wrong by this, but if you're basing the argument on the idea that the base serpent means base as in like most basic form, unfortunately the Japanese for like the base serpent is jana, and jana, well, that's just the adjective to describe the serpent. Ja is like meant in the sense of wicked or evil, if I'm remembering correctly. So it's like the evil serpent rather than just like the base as in lowly, the bad kind of lowly.
that it was the Gloam-eyed Queen. Now hold on, put down your torches and pitchforks. I promise this isn't the big reveal of my theory, though I do have something to confirm it. Yes, I'm aware the idea that this thing is the Gloam-eyed Queen has existed since the day the trailer came out. Tons of people were talking about how the color and texture of it looks to be the same as Godskin, and some believe it looks like a serpent's head. I was skeptical myself at first, and now I'm 100% convinced. Let's look at some basic facts. The Godskins have numerous crucible features, from the apostles' ability to stretch their body out like a snake, to the noble's tail summoning. A Godskin noble is even allied with Rykard and the god-devouring serpent in Volcano Manor, guarding the serpent's amnion, an item many have already theorized to be the method by which Godskins are created. Of course, these are all things that we've heard before. I'm not exactly spouting anything new. If only there was something more concrete, something more solid, a real smoking gun, if you will. I guess the smoking greatsword will have to do. The Godslayer's greatsword isn't a new item. It's found in the Divine Tower of Caelid after a Godskin Apostle boss battle. But it does have a whole lot of new context. The item description reads, Sacred Sword of the Gloam-eyed Queen, who controlled the Godskin Apostles before her defeat at the hands of Malekith. Additionally, the weapon's skill is called the Queen's Black Flame. There is no question that the Godslayer's greatsword belonged to the Gloam-eyed Queen personally. So let's take a look at the sword's shape, shall we? See it yet? It's a spiral! My good friend Max is actually the one who reminded me of the weapon when I had completely forgotten about it, so this one goes out to you, bud. In case you don't understand the implication of the spiral or otherwise need a refresher, here it is. While in Marika's era, the Crucible is most often depicted as a great tree with intertwining branches and spreading roots, that's not how the Hornsent depicted it. They don't seem to have viewed it as a physical thing at all, but more like a metaphysical force of primordial life, which they represented with a spiral pattern. The item description of the Spira incantation tells us, superior sorcery of the Tower Priests, wielded as an incantation of the Spira.
So I do like that you put the description here. I was a little bit curious as to why you didn't have the description on the screen earlier, because that might have helped with the Godslayer Greatsword. So this is just a little bit inconsistent here, which is, fine. It's, part of the content creation process here, but that might be worth considering. And also you could put it up here and crop it to fit over your Mesmer statue like you did with that icon. Because if somebody is using the captions, it might cover it and could be a little bit awkward. But that's kind of like the least of your concerns, really. What was I going to say? I guess I'll leave that there and let you get back into your points, and then touch on that after you finish it.
Spiral. Wrap one's arms together.
All right. So if you want this to like look better, like cropped up this way, you could also go into like the Vextra page and then zoom in, so that way it looks like it's formatted to fit this spot specifically, rather than you would if you're looking at a website normally like this. All right.
And hold them up to the heavens to summon a spiral of light that erupts at the enemy's feet. Column of light persists for as long as the button is pressed. The spiral is a normalized crucible current that, one day, will form a column that stretches to the gods. It is this perceived spiral the Hornsent mimicked when constructing Bellarat Tower, which houses the Gate of Divinity, the very place an Empyrean must go in order to become a true god. And look at the tip of the Godslayer's greatsword. 2 points, looking just like the Gate of Divinity. If that ain't perfect evidence, I don't know what is. Now, don't get me wrong, it's entirely possible that this thing is not the Glomide Queen or the ruling god of the Hornsent's era. But the instant Max reminded me of the Godslayer's greatsword was the instant I became 100% convinced that the Glomide Queen was the god of that era. Now that I've hopefully convinced you, that leads us to a natural question. The one rule that the Lands Between beats us with over and over again is that in age, in era, in order, they require 2 things: a god and their lord consort. If the Glomide Queen was the god of this crucible era, then who was her lord consort? Better yet, who could consort with that thing? We already have the answer. Dragon Lord Placidusax. Aside from the obvious points that dragons and serpents tend to be related in many mythologies, and Placidusax's remembrance refers to him as Elden Lord in the age before the Erdtree, which frankly is all the evidence I really need. There's also the matter of the Elden Ring itself. In Farum Azula, you run across this image of the Elden Ring, presumably how it looked during Placi's era as Lord. We can clearly see how the ring is quite different from the current era, and for the 2 years since the game originally came out, people have compared it to the roots of a tree, only
Fudge, I was muted. Curses. All right, so operator had brought up a good question that I spent like 5 minutes addressing, muted, in that wasn't the Glowmite Queen stated to be an Empyrean rather than a god in some item? Yes. And so this goes back into the issue of the Glowmite Queen, which I bring up all the time, in that... Sorry, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself because I already made my argument. So this goes back into the issue of whether or not one's Empyrean status comes to an end when they ascend to divinity, or whether or not it's still there within them, i.e. is Marika still technically an Empyrean, even though she's the god now? So it's possible that she could have been an Empyrean god, like Marika may be an Empyrean god, but we don't really know. But despite that, one of the other greater issues in talking about the timeline with the Glowmite Queen is her relation to the Rune of Death, and the Rune of Death's relation to the Elden Ring in kind. So, if the Golden Order was created upon removing the Rune of Death from the Elden Ring, then it implies the Rune of Death is in the Elden Ring. And if the Glowmite Queen was the steward of the Rune of Death, and the Rune of Death is in the Elden Ring, does that imply that she was also the steward of the Elden Ring? Was she the god of a previous age? I definitely think it's a strong possibility, and that would certainly put her most likely as the god that directly preceded Marika, which is perfectly in line with what Hell Yeah Gaming is saying here. There are some other issues that come along with that about when one believes the Golden Order was created, whether that was with the creation of the Erdtree or if it was manifested later with Radagon. And of course, the biggest issue with like the whole Radagon timeline in the relation to the Golden Order goes back into, well then, if Marika was the god and had the Elden Ring, and the Rune of Death was part of the Elden Ring, and it belonged to the Empyrean Glowmite Queen, then did Marika just give the Rune of Death to the Glowmite Queen to begin with, or like the powers of it, and then once she took it out, she like defeated Malekith, or vice versa? Anyway, how do you reconcile that conflict? And you could go into like, well, maybe it's the Melina connection, maybe Marika is related to the Glowmite Queen, but it's just not super clean whether you think the Glowmite Queen was before Marika and her reign or during Marika and her reign is kind of my ultimate point. But thanks for letting me know I was muted, guys. And then Pixie says, you say this all the time and you don't get it. Gods were Empyreans, and the description is talking about when the Glowmite Queen was chosen. And so another thing to consider is like how and when like Malekith was given to Marika for her to like fight the Glowmite Queen. And it really sucks that we don't even get a hint of Malekith in the DLC or other shadows. And Captini said, didn't it say somewhere that Placidusax's Dragon Lord was waiting for his god because she left? The Greater Will sent the new ring or Elden Beast? No, there's definitely nothing about a new ring. So, hold on, let me hydrate again real quick. So yeah, Hell Yeah Gaming does say that it's believed that the Glowmite Queen was an Empyrean, which I think is fair, but now that you've activated my trap card, it's also said that Placidusax was an Elden Lord, not that he actually was one. But yeah, in all seriousness, I do not buy that Placidusax was the Elden Lord, because we have multiple other items descriptions stating that Godfrey was the first Elden Lord. Now, having said that, I don't deny the possibility that the role Placidusax served may have been analogous to that of an Elden Lord or the de facto ruler of the Lands Between, because they were the biggest badass of the Lands Between up until they fought Baal, I guess, but even still. So if Placidusax had the Elden Ring, he may not have quote-unquote brandished it the same way that Godfrey or Radagon or our tarnished player character does. So this is splitting hairs a bit, but you know, this just kind of comes with the territory of lore discussion. Aaron just assumed it meant the first Elden Lord under the Erdtree. And that's a possibility, and if so, I hate it, and I would never forgive Miyazaki and quit lore hunting. Probably unironically. You don't know if you buy the Gek definitely became a god stuff? Yeah. Okay. I think that's all I wanted to say right there. Let's go back in.
Knowing what we know now, that's not the most likely imagery that it's evoking, is it? Instead of tree roots, I see a series of spirals, or perhaps snakes, all converging together, intertwining toward a single point, the Crucible, where they all blend. This would also perfectly answer the question as to why there's a horde of godskins in Farum Azula, the seat of power of the Dragon Lord. They're either standing guard over Plassey while he's recovering from his injuries, or else were stationed there as permanent fixtures by the Glow-Mind Queen to protect her interests there. Of course, this is all well and good, but really we're just setting the stage for the main event. Now that we've established the background information, let's build from there, because I believe that I've uncovered what exactly is Marika's original sin, as well as her seduction and betrayal. And it's all centered around.
Alright, so cutting him off before he gets to the big point. As far as the Glow-Mind Queen being the potential god of Placidusax and or the Horn Scent, in many ways, thematically, I do think it makes a lot of sense, but I feel like when you pull apart a lot of the things in Farum Azula and Bellyrat / Anira Lim, none of them seem to tie into each other, by which I mean, other than the fact that you get the odd Godskin duo in Farum Azula protecting the way to Malekith, I don't really think we have a lot of iconography tying Farum Azula to Anira Lim, which you might say like it's because that was after the Gek abandoned Placidusax, which is perfectly fine. And I honestly don't find a lot of commonalities between Bellyrat and the Glow-Mind Queen beyond the spiral of the Godslayer's Greatsword. And I'm sure you might say, but the Godslayer's Greatsword does have that spiral. How can you just disregard that? I'm not entirely disregarding that. However, unfortunately, we also do have depictions of spirals in other Erdtree related imagery. And of course, like the Erdtree could have just been suffused with vital energies of the Crucible, so don't get me wrong here, but let's pull it up. And we've been talking about this on the Discord, even earlier today, as a matter of fact, that the Elden Stars incantation also has a spiraling torrent to it, which is kind of reminiscent to that of the Spiral Tree Seal, almost. It's kind of a shame that we don't have two hands growing out of it, but the spiral stuff isn't entirely unique to the Horn Scent or the Glow-Mind Queen or even the Erdtree, unfortunately. So if it was a little bit more than just the spirals, if we had more of a Godskin, Noble, Apostle, Black Flame Monk connection to Anira Lim, Bellyrat, and the Horn Scent, I would probably be more in favor of these kind of connections. But for now, I'm still on the fence. And then I guess I'll make some notes. Well, no, I guess since I'm on the topic of the Crucible and whatnot, you didn't present it this way right here, so I'm sorry for strawmanning you. That's not entirely my point. But correct me if I'm wrong. I'm getting the vibe, and this is kind of rhetorical, I'm getting the vibe that you think that the Spira incantation is part of the Crucible's energies, and I might be wrong about that, but I would say that there's a slight difference where I think the Spira incantation is supposed to take a pre-existing Crucible's energies and normalize or rectify them into a point which will pierce the heavens, essentially. And the Horn Scent thing is still slightly separate from the Crucible, which I think is reinforced in the way that the Divine Invocation incantations say that they resemble the Crucible, but they seem to draw power on different sources, and they don't get boosted by the Crucible Knight's armor set's aspect of the Crucible incantation boosts and whatnot. So the other thing that I want to mention about the Crucible, which kind of separates it from the ideology of the Spiral a little bit, goes back into the thing which I constantly reference, the biggest thorn in my side about like lore hunting and probably the entire game, maybe a little bit unironically here, which longtime viewers will know. Wait, what? Where is me image? Okay. It is Siluria's tree. So Siluria's tree mentions that... Wait, I think I have it on the sheet too. Oh no, this is that one. All right, Siluria's tree mentions the primordial form of the Erdtree is close in nature to life itself, and this spear, modeled on its crucible, is imbued with ancient holy essence. So to me, this signifies, besides like some of the translation stuff that I don't want to get into right now, is that the spear, if it's shaped on the crucible and is shaped as a tree, would imply that the crucible itself is a tree. And granted, while the Siluria tree itself isn't super spirally, I will admit that the Silurian armor has a kind of depiction of a spiral at its base. Where's me footage? So right down here, we get a little bit of a spiral insignia going on. Oh, so that wasn't too much of a close-up. All right, anyway, this should be it. So it's just not bright, but yeah, we get the kind of similar crucible, maybe not crucible, the spiral tree sigil type thing in a near limb to this guy, or gal rather. So those are, none of this like fully contradicts any of your ideas here, to be clear, but I just wanted to present them for fullness of thought. The Crucible Knights will be talked about? Okay, cool. Aaron said, Quaylog recently on a stream described how Velka is similar to the Gek because of the scraps of lore that we have, but she did also summarize Velka in that she was possibly a counter deity to Gwyn, and thus a lot of her was stomped out in society. And that also sort of parallels Marika and the Gek. Could you elaborate on how it parallels Marika and the Golem-Eyed Queen? Because I think I'm picking up what you're putting down, but I don't want to misinterpret it either. Oh, Pixie was talking about it earlier. Okay. Aaron likes the idea of the Golem-Eyed Queen being Placidusax's god. You like her maybe being Melina. You like her being an Empyrean at the same time, or at the time of Marika and Bellirat. You just wish she wasn't, as Quaylog says, this game's Velka. Okay, so that's what triggered that conversation. Okay. Understandable. All right, let's go back into the video.
One important figure. I haven't seen anybody else so much as give a single thought about. Before I reveal my conclusion, let's go over what we know about this original sin in question. Marika's people, the shaman, or shrine maidens if we're being more pedantic and translation accurate, were all but wiped out by the horn scent because their flesh was malleable and proved crucial in the creation of their living jars. While this process of melding flesh together was considered to be a blessing to the criminals made into saints, likely owing to the blending of flesh being seen as symbolic of the crucible, all evidence points to the recipients of this treatment finding it abhorrent. Marika had absolutely no love for the horn scent, and in all likelihood it was her own vengeance that served as the primary motivation for her actions going forward. How then does one betray a group which they feel nothing but loathing? The only reasonable conclusion is that Marika had to bide her time, and use that time to build a relationship with the Hornsent and their god. After all, if Marika was hostile from the get-go, they would have no reason to consider her later actions a betrayal. With a powerful god who wielded the flame of destined death, children who skinned her rival gods, the mightiest of the dragons as her elden lord, and all his brood, the gloam-eyed queen was far too much to usurp without the right resources and opportunity. Luckily, that opportunity would present itself in the form of Curse You, Baal! One day.
So before going too far down that route, and this is a little bit unfair, but I am left questioning, like, what exactly you think it meant by saying that the Gloam-eyed Queen was fled from Placidus Axe. Do you think that, and you might talk about this in your video, but, you know, this is just kind of like the stream of consciousness nature of a reaction. Would you think that the Gloam-eyed Queen was fled from Placidus Axe as a result of the attempted usurpation by Baal on what I'm assuming you're going to say would be like on behalf of Marika or due to her machinations? Or was she already separate from Placidus Axe at this point, and Placidus Axe was just left chilling in his bachelor pad, I guess? And then Liam Vickers, welcome on in. The last thing you heard about Siraj was taken. It's possible that he took Siraj very early because he uses an axe at the round table. When he removes Siraj to be Horalu, he uses his bare hands. So the only thing about the round table is that it does seem very tied to the creation of the Erdtree, or at least the forces of the Erdtree, and I don't think that contradicts like the possibility that Godfrey would have taken Siraj on his back around the Marika timeline. Sorry, I said that wrong, incorrectly. What I mean is I don't think anything with the round table hold necessarily supersedes like the Erdtree times. Whereas I was trying to say, is it possible that Godfrey took Siraj on his back way before he even had anything to do with Marika? But I don't think that's the vibes that the game is giving off, but I'm just kind of like left wondering that after everything.
Baal the Dread attempted to kill Placidus Axe, causing both to suffer grave wounds from the battle, and Placidus Axe proceeded to remove himself from the natural flow of time in order to recover. Now, I am not saying that Marika orchestrated this event personally. There's zero evidence to support an alliance between herself and Baal. What I am saying is that the Dread's attempted coup presented the then Empyrean with the perfect opportunity. With Placidus Axe, the Lord Consort of the then current god, removed from the table, Marika was able to reveal the rest of her pieces on the board. As we all know, it was her Empyrean shadow, Malekith, who destroyed the Gloam-eyed Queen on Marika's behalf. But a revolution is not won with a single soldier, no matter how mighty he be. And we saw the bodies Marika left in her wake at the gates of divinity. That's a lot of dead dudes. While I suppose it's possible Marika herself killed all those Hornsent, it would make much more sense for her to have built up her own forces. And those forces needed a leader, one who wouldn't raise any suspicion. More than that, This was the moment that Marika ascended from Empyrean to full-fledged god. The moment she founded her Golden Order. The moment she created the Erdtree. What is the true nature of her seduction and betrayal? Once again, I have to reiterate, if there is one rule Elden Ring beats us with over and over again, it's the rule of two. For an order to exist, it must have both a god and a lord consort. Enter Horalu, warrior. While rambling about my theories to Max, it had suddenly struck me. Marika needed her first Elden Lord, Godfrey, on her ascension, and yet there hadn't been a single mention of him by either of his names in the DLC. As a result, I think the theorizing and lore community as a whole just sort of forgot about him and his importance, forgot to include him. But according to the rules of the setting, he had to have been there and involved in some way. The only way I can reconcile this gross oversight is if we already have all the information provided to us in the base game needed. Now that we have the additional lore of the DLC to recontextualize it. According to the Crucible Knights set, the Crucible Knights served Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. And of course, Godfrey is simply the name that was granted to the warrior Horalu to befit his new lordly station. Therefore, it is my theory, a theory which I personally believe to be canon, but is still just a theory, that Horalu lived within the Hornsent's rule as one of their mightiest commanders. Perhaps his men were not yet the Crucible Knights as we would later know them. In particular, the tree imagery, I imagine, was Marika's own rebranding of the Crucible in her order's early years. But they were still among the mightiest warriors of the Crucible era.
And yeah, so one of the things about the Crucible Knights that bothers me is that Devonia is the longest serving member of the Crucible Knights, but is kind of unaware of the origins, I guess, of the Crucible. And that makes me wonder if like the original Crucible Knights had died and if Devonia came later or something along those lines. But I guess that's like not really important. As I was thinking through some aspects of this video, I was reconsidering some of the potential connections between the Hornsent and Fair Missoula after all. And I did kind of forget that there is potentially a common connection via Sarash after all, because of the way that Sarash was the Beast Lord, and Malekith gives us things related to Sarash, which could potentially tie it to Fair Missoula. And of course, this part is a stretch that Sarash may have had some connections to the Hornsent and like those kind of lions. But then one of my questions becomes, if Sarash was subservient to Placidus X and the Glomide Queen, why would he be like Lord of kind of both sanctums, I guess? Because there is that kind of weird connection between both cultures via Sarash, although the Hornsent one is a bit more of a stretch. Just an argument of convenience more than anything. There is a mention where he accepts Zap. Yeah, but that's so minor, I think it's pretty fair to ignore. All right, thank you, Liam. Appreciate that. Aaron said, you guess Godfrey didn't tell them about the origins when he made them a unit? Maybe because America wanted all that stuff squashed? I don't know. It is one of the weirder parts of the DLC to me that the Crucible Knights don't know its origin. It's also weird to me that the Crucible Knights followed Godfrey if the Crucible is supposed to have been something which predated Godfrey's era, but I don't want to get too far off track on that point. Pixie said, what's the confusion? Siraj can be a part of the Placidisac's rule to head up the Beastmen and worship by the Hornsent at the same time. Well, the thing is, it's weird to me that lions would be seen as being closer to the divine than something like the dragons, even though the dragons were the rulers in that era, allegedly. But I am kind of getting more and more towards the belief that the Hornsent stuff might have happened later after the birth of the Erdtree, which is a little bit blasphemous. But speaking of blasphemy, I'm going to need to make a note. First sin. Yeah, I'll just leave that there.
And under their commander's orders, they turned on and betrayed the Gloam-eyed Queen. That is Marika's seduction. She seduced the warrior Horalu with the promise of being her lord consort so that he could wage war with the rest of the lands between, fulfilling the lust for battle he craved. That is Marika's betrayal.
Okay, so some more supporting evidence for Hell Yeah Gaming's theory here would be that in Stormvale Castle, we do get the Godslayer seal and the first incantation book for the Godskins. So that might be one connection there, but it still does bug me that we don't really get more actual Godskin iconography anywhere, really.
She bided her time, sowing rebellion into the ranks of the Crucible's own forces, then usurped the established rule when the opportunity presented itself. That is Marika's original sin. She destroyed the God and the Crucible Order to ascend to the gates of divinity. On a sacrifice of the holy people she would go on to build her own order from. With that all in mind, here's how I imagine
those sound effects are just way too loud for your voice.
In the timeline of events playing out. The Hornsent discover the shaman village and begin the persecution that leaves the village essentially lifeless. At some point during all of this, Marika is approached by the Two Fingers, or perhaps even Meter herself, and chosen to be an Empyrean. Naturally, she's provided with her Empyrean shadow, Malekith, who proves himself to be an unstoppable monster in battle. Whether because she's too much trouble to capture for the jars, too powerful to kill with the Godskinners, or she hides her Numen shaman heritage, Marika is left alone by the Hornsent and allowed to mingle with their ranks. She becomes a powerful ally. Unbeknownst to them, this is all an act as she bides her time. Marika seduces Horalu with the promise of power and an unending war, something he is all too eager to join in on. He gets his Crucible Knights, or the group that would eventually become the Crucible Knights, as well as any other soldiers loyal to his command, to join. Eventually, by a stroke of luck, the Elden Lord Placidisax is injured during an altercation with Baal the Dread, allowing Marika the perfect time to strike. Horalu and his knights battle the Hornsent forces, whilst Malekith slays the Gloam-eyed Queen.
I get what you're saying with a lot of this stuff, and I think if you don't look too closely, a lot of it can fit together, but I don't know how fair this criticism will be, but many of the oddities of trying to tie all of these disparate groups together is that they are kind of disparate groups. And what I mean by that is that when we use anything pertaining to the Godskins, they like scale off of faith and I think strength, which is kind of similar to the bestial incantations, which isn't important right now. The aspect of the Crucible stuff is also based off of faith, but it's like more pure faith, I guess. It's not entirely like the Godskin stuff, but that's neither here nor there either. But the Horn Scent don't use incantations at all, technically speaking. They use sorceries as incantations, which seems a little bit incongruous with what's going on with the Godskin Black Flame incantations. Although, to be fair, maybe before the Rune of Death was sealed, they were different in their form and or the functionality. That part might be more arguable. Although, I was going to say maybe I doubt it because of like the Black Knives and how they scale, but technically they're only fragments of the Rune of Death, so I think you could still wiggle out of that. But, yeah. It would just also be weird to me that the god of the Horn Scent, as far as we know, with the Glowmaid Queen, doesn't seem to be particularly related to things like horns, other than just the spiral. So I get where you're going for with this, and I think it's commendable, and I think in a certain sense it kind of works, but I think the more you pick at it, the more stitched together it feels. I don't want to call it like Frankenstein's monster, but I can't think of like a more kind description. So it's not that I like particularly disagree with any one thing as much as it is like there are too many things nagging it at me to like fully support it. And this isn't like being like, oh, I just disagree with this. I'm like, I totally get where you're coming from, but yeah. Hell Yeah Gaming said the timeline just doesn't fit with the rest of the video's format, and the thesis created a lot of confusion among viewers as to what you're actually trying to accomplish here. Yeah, it could be pretty rough doing stuff like that.
Marika takes the Elden Ring from her body and ascends to godhood on the sacrifice of all those killed in the name of her Golden Order. She names Horalu her Lord Consort and bestows upon him the name Godfrey, then sends him and his army south to Limgrave, the Weeping Peninsula, and Caelid to wage war and bring the territories into her order. She creates the Erdtree, and with it the Shadow Tree, which removes the Hornsent capital from the lands between and shunts it into its own pocket dimension. Wow.
Alright guys, just as a rule of thumb for like my channel and server, like don't make any attacks about people's physical appearance, even like, I don't know. We can't necessarily tell tone on the internet, and so while I think Captini's making a joke, I still think it's in poor taste, because it's kind of irrelevant to the actual content that they're trying to produce. So just be more respectful to other people, because they're people, you know?
While Godfrey is busy kicking ass across the southern stretches of the continent, Marika sends Radagon, her other half, but maybe not yet her other half, to conquer Liurnia. Of course, Liurnia does not fall to war, leading to a stalemate and eventually the civil union between Radagon and Queen Renala, sealing Liurnia's assimilation through politics. Finally, Godfrey leads the forces of the Golden Order north to the mountaintops of the Giants, where they waged the final war to unite all the lands between under Marika's Golden Order.
Wait, what? Hold on, I'm going to need to back up this timeline.
Territories into her order. She creates the Erdtree, and with it the Shadow Tree.
Hold on, let me back up slightly more. I hate YouTube.
With Bale the Dread, allowing Marika the perfect time to strike. Horalu and his knights battle the Hornsent forces, whilst Malekith slays the Glowmaid Queen. Marika takes the Elden Ring from her body and ascends to godhood on the sacrifice of all those killed in the name of her Golden Order. She names Horalu her Lord Consort and bestows upon him the name Godfrey, then sends him and his army south to Limgrave, the Weeping Peninsula, and Caelid to wage war and bring the territories into her order. She creates the Erdtree, and with it the Shadow Tree.
So the issue with that part there in particular is that Radagon was already part of Laendel's Golden Host, aka Laendel's armies, and we know they came much later in the timeline than Godfrey's initial conquest into Caelid and whatnot, as well as the war against the giants, partially because the Barrier of Gold incantation is that of like Erdtree worship as opposed to Erdtree faithful or ancient Erdtree incantations. And obviously the war against the giants should have happened before Radagon came to Liurnia because the Erdtree already existed, and we could definitely confirm that with Muriel's dialogue saying that the Church of Vow was built to hold in view the Erdtree as well as Radio Lucaria, so the Erdtree had to have been a thing long before Radagon met Rennala. Hey Stobo, welcome in.
Which removes the Hornsent capital from the lands between and shunts it into its own pocket dimension. While Godfrey is busy kicking ass across the southern stretches of the continent, Marika sends Radagon, her other half, but maybe not yet her other half, to conquer Liurnia. Of course, Liurnia does not fall to war, leading to a stalemate and eventually the civil union between Radagon and Queen Rennala, sealing Liurnia's assimilation through politics. Finally, Godfrey leads the forces of the Golden Order north to the mountaintops of the Giants, where they waged the final war to unite all the lands between under Marika's Golden Order. As soon as the Giants were wiped out to all but the last man, Marika took her grace from Godfrey and others, creating the Tarnished, and banished them, while Radagon was waiting in the wings to step up as the...
Oh, that wasn't me. Okay, well, I guess since it's buffering, I'm going to pause it. Another thing to consider is, although I like the idea of Godfrey taking his campaign south, I don't think that works. Not only because we're kind of told that the war against the Giants was the birth of the Erdtree, but we might have some incidental environmental clues that they came from the north and then worked their way south through the ordinal numbering of the churches of Marika. So I don't know how familiar you are with like the missions of like the Catholic churches in California and whatnot, but they're numbered in accordance to with when they were like founded. And I think the same kind of principle is on display in Elden Ring, where the first Church of Marika is in the mountaintops of the Giants. The second is in Altus Plateau, which is kind of where Laendel is. And then the third one is in Limgrave. And the fourth is in the Weeping Peninsula. Oddly enough, there are no Churches of Marika in Caelid, which is really fun to consider. And a crap ton in the Land of Shadow, and we don't know when those are established. Potentially even after, well, maybe not after Godfrey, but, you know, maybe... Either way, I don't want to get into that. So, yeah, I think your timeline right here is skewed, which actually shouldn't really inform too much about what you were talking about earlier, but it is unfortunate that you kind of stumble right here at the finish line. Those are events you addressed in your follow-up criticism video. You have no idea why you somehow got it in your head the Fire Giants War was last. But like you said, putting this whole timeline in from the get-go was just a bad idea and completely upended your entire format. So much for solving it all.
Second Elden Lord, because, say it with me everyone, in order requires both a god and a lord consort. Sometime after the banishing of the Tarnished, Marika tasked Mesmer with leading a conquest to the Shadowlands, which eventually kicks off the story of the DLC. And that's all I've got for you today. Whew!
Hold on, I'm going to listen to that last line again.
Order requires both a god and a lord consort. Sometime after the banishing of the Tarnished, Marika tasked Mesmer with leading a conquest to the Shadowlands, which...
I don't like the way you worded that, because it makes it sound as though Mesmer wasn't in the Shadowlands there to begin with. And I'm not sure where you actually place the sealing of the Shadowland in the timeline, other than apparently after Radagon's ascension, which is arguable. Or maybe place it in with the defeat of the Glowmide Queen. Maybe I forgot that part already, but I don't want to like look that up. But either way, I would make the argument that Mesmer and the Carians who accompanied him, as well as the folk of the Erdtree who would go on to become his Fire Knights and whatnot, they were probably already in the section of the lands between that would break off to form the Land of Shadow when Marika sealed it away, and then later on they would go on to do that conquest. But that's a little bit pedantic, I suppose. Yeah, it confused the mission statement of the theory. It sucks.
Eventually kicks off the story of the DLC. And that's all I've got for you today. Whew! Are you convinced? Tell me why or why not in the comments below. And remember, just because I'm confident that I've solved the DLC doesn't mean you have to take it as gospel. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. If this theory interested you, then check out my Fallout crossover playthrough where I burn down the lands between as Confessor Cromwell for the Children of Atom.
Okay, so just to read some things. Captini asked, are the churches facing anywhere? Kind of like old mosques point towards Petra instead of Mecca, giving it about that original holy site was Petra. Interesting. Is that because they moved the relic, which I can't remember the name of right now and I feel embarrassed about? I don't know enough about the history of Islam to be familiar. Aaron said, you're trying to remember? Something in the game said that the defeat of the fire giants marked the era of the Erdtree, not the Golden Order, but the Erdtree. There's a lot to talk about the delineation between the Golden Order and the Erdtree, but that'll take too much time to get into. But to answer Aaron's question indirectly, as far as I'm aware, there's nothing which really states definitively when the Golden Order began, with the possible exception of Roger's dialogue about the practices of Raya Lucaria contravening the Golden Order, but that could just be like in the past. But anyway, that or the telescope's description, which is really weird because it says that during the age of the Erdtree, why don't I just pull up the actual quote so I don't misrepresent things here? And then I could look at the Roger thing as well. During the age of the Erdtree, Carian astrology withered on the vine. The fate in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order. Or the fate once written in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order. And stopping by to learn a battle art or two. The battle art you've learned is of the Glintstone family. They were conceived at the great academy of Raya Lucaria to the north of this castle. In the past, they obeyed laws which contravened the Golden Order, or so I'm told. Fascinating, isn't it? That the Golden Order was pliable enough to absorb practices that contradicted itself in the past. With the Order broken, twisted, and in need of repair, such adaptability is more important now than ever. Okay, so the way that I look at his dialogue here is that even though he says in the past they obeyed laws which contravened the Golden Order, he does say, so I'm told. But that is just hearsay to him. And even if it was kind of in the past, we don't know which point in the past he's referencing specifically. So we have Huruku here, which is like old time ago, essentially a long time ago. But does that long time ago mean like since the beginning of the Erdtree, the Liurnian Wars? Or does that mean they could have contradicted the Golden Order even after its creation with Radagon. Obviously, I don't think that makes a ton of sense on the surface, but the way that I make sense of it would be that Rey Lucaria was in a kind of not entirely civil war with Leyndell at one point, so that's where you get the contravention, and because the Golden Order would go on to try and rewrite history to say that Marika is the one true god, that's where we get this kind of incongruity between his dialogue and the potential timeline of events here. So it's not pretty. I know a lot of people hate it, which they're certainly free to do so, but that kind of makes the most sense to me. And my Achilles heel is most definitely the telescope's description, because it says the age of the Erdtree, carrying astrology withered on the vine, and then the fate once written in the night skies had been fettered by the Golden Order. But to be fair, technically the last part doesn't have to connect into that age of the Erdtree, but that's kind of like a pedantic weaseling out of it. So some people have wondered more specifically about the fate being withered of the astrologers in the night sky. If that was done due to Radon halting the stars in the night sky, which means after Radagon marries Renala, or if it's potentially Radagon incorporating like the laws of causality and regression into the Elden Ring, which kind of makes the most sense to me. Because causality ties to fate with like karma and stuff, although that's not as clear in English. And I'm super glad I was not muted for all that. You activated my trap card. The Edge interview conflates them. So I don't think the Edge interview truly conflates them, because in that line by Miyazaki, he says, in the time of the Golden Order, there were 2 Elden Lords. That's true. Radagon is the second of the Elden Lords during the time of the Golden Order, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the first Elden Lord was the Lord of the Golden Order. And to help support my point, which you guys might think is overly pedantic, in the Mending Rune of the Death Prince, we're told that the Golden Order was created by removing destined death. Thus, this new order will be one of death restored. So, if becoming Elden Lord means that there's going to be a new order or a new age, then how can one order have 2 Elden Lords? That doesn't make sense. My argument is that the age of the Erdtree is Godfrey's age, the Golden Order is Radagon's, and then whatever the Tarnished chooses is the new order. Not nude order, but new order. So hopefully that all makes sense. Oh yeah, and I never even addressed Aaron's original point about the Giants of the Sword. See, this is why I said that I shouldn't talk about it, because I just went off on a rant tangent. Alright, Helya's stance is that the Land of Shadow was sealed at the creation of the 2 trees, and Mesmer was sent in sometime after Radagon taking the throne. See, to me, that doesn't make much sense with the way that we have so many Carians within the Realm of Shadow, and it doesn't, like, it's possible they all could have been sent there later, but we don't really have any indication of that, and because Mikola and Empyrean had to go such extremes to get into the Realm of Shadow, that leaves me doubting how Mesmer and his forces did it. Of course, maybe you could say like Marika ushered them all in, but why would she need to hide Mesmer and then like send him in later, I guess? So she sealed it and then swept Mesmer under the rug? Or was it by sealing the place did she sweep Mesmer under the rug? Siluria traveled there by herself? You mean Devonia? Yeah. Crash Bandicoot fan says, to be fair on that bit, restore the Golden Order is said a lot. And that might be like the returning to an age of fracture, but we're also told verbatim that the two fingers are bent and broken, and I kind of don't trust them and their knowledge on the actual state of the Golden Order. So in their minds, they might want us to prolong it, but I think there have been like catastrophic shifts between Godfrey's time and Radagon's time and what will be our time. Pigsy says, it seems like it was sealed after the war started. The ghosts and stuff seem to have expected that they could return home after, but Marika abandoned them. Sorry, which war are you talking about? The Crusade? Okay. Let me think about that and hydrate again real quick. All right, so counterpoints. Could it have been that Marika promised them something that they could come back after the crusade was finished? But so she's like, okay, guys, I'm going to like close the door. You can fight your little brother, but I'll let you guys out. And then she just never opens the door again. And like, what the hell, bro? So yeah, maybe they thought they were abandoned, but just kind of like misunderstood the directive because Mesmer was, what's the word? Deceiving them. And I've wondered if part of the reason why she couldn't or didn't let the warring siblings back out of their room is because she was stuck in her own room by the Elden Beast because of the shattering and whatnot. But okay, everybody, I'm going to go ahead and, of course, share Hell Yeah Gaming's video with you guys in the chat. And they said they had like a video game tournament competition thing going on Labor Day at either 9 or 10 p.m. or a.m. Eastern Standard Time. So it'll be in the morning for you U.S. folk if you want to join in then. I don't think I'll be able to make it with the holiday and everything. And yeah, but I definitely appreciate the invite. Hell Yeah Gaming says, sealing the land after the crusade begins doesn't make a ton of sense to you. Oh, no, I wouldn't say it's after the crusade began. I would say that she sealed the land and then the crusade happened much, much later, actually. Oh, yeah. And I didn't actually get into my point about the first sin. So I do disagree with you about the first sin being like becoming the god. And this might be splitting hairs depending on your overall interpretation of things here. But let's go ahead and pull it up. Okay, so we do have a couple of bits of dialogue and descriptions worth considering about what this first original cardinal sin is. So this is the finger reader crone on the lift of Rold in the Forbidden Lands. She says, "Hear me, the burning of the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin. Doing so will unbind destined death and slay the world itself." So the first sin equals burning the Erdtree, which might tie into what Marika did to become a god. Perhaps it depends on your interpretation of that. And so just to get a quick reference, because if I just type in cardinal sin, it'll come up a couple different ways, but Gensho no Taizai is like original sin, well, original like great sin, but it doesn't mean that in the Catholic sense. But Ania also has a bit of a line about this, and this also appears in Flames Deadly Sin? I am too tired to remember. The burning of the Erdtree. Hold on. So we say we want to burn the Erdtree. Quote, "Heavens forbid, that is not the domain of mere men. The burning of the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin, and you say you seek the power of the Rune of Death too? The Rune of Death goes by two names, the other is Destined Death. The forbidden shadow plucked from the Golden Order upon its creation. Unleashing the rune now would be unthinkable. The fingers would never permit it, nor would the greater will. But here we are. Yeah. So, anyway, you guys get the point with that. And now this will kind of get repeated verbatim in the Fire's Deadly Sin description. It's exactly Enya's quote. The burning of the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin. That is not the domain of mere men. Oh, I guess it's slightly rearranged. Let me double check that. Yeah, I think it is, but okay. It's not the okay, yeah, so it is so like this part just comes okay, I was right. Anyway, so yeah, it is definitely my opinion that burning the tree is the first sin, and I don't know when exactly that was. For me, it makes a lot of sense if burning the Erdtree created the Erdtree, if it's like a pyrophyte, and that it would be a tree that kind of gets put on fire, then its seeds get released, and then it becomes born anew. That might be one way of thinking about it, because we ourselves need to burn the tree in order to make our new age. And I think I talked about this earlier tonight on stream as well. So I just wanted to finish on that note, so that way I didn't leave a stone unturned. Operator's timeline seems divergent from mine, but it's so confusing. It's fine. You guys don't have to agree with my timelines, by the way. I'm just trying to present it as well as I think I can. And you're welcome for that. Pixie says, at the same time, it makes sense to them for the land to be sealed when the Destined Death was plucked, and you do think that happened when the Erdtree was born. And so, if you think that, I think you just need to reconcile the Carians, and maybe you could say, like, Marika helped them out, or maybe Renala and Rolana have some crazy lunar magic. We were joking about that in the... I almost said DLC in the Discord server. So... stupid-ass Mikola didn't have the high enough int requirement to use lunar magic to get into the Shadowlands, is my overall point. Aaron brings up the great point that America really had to politically sacrifice Mesmer. I don't know. I think it's just like... Mesmer was already a political sacrifice just due to his nature, and... the real trick was trying to keep it secret from others, but people still liked him regardless. He's pretty tragic, all things considered. Understandable, hell yeah, gaming, and thanks for asking us to review your video and being a good sport about it. Appreciate that. Okay, everybody, that'll be it for tonight's stream. We will be going live again at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time as usual. So hopefully we'll catch you on the next one. So Sasquatch, hello and goodbye. All right, folks, so long. Take care. Stay safe. That's Protagonist out.